like we're good. Okay, it is 5:01. Let's bring our meeting to order. So opening items, call to order 5:01, the establishment of the agenda.
I move we establish the agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Motion and a second to establish agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is adopted. So we'll move on to 1C, recognition.
So here with us tonight are the MIHS radio broadcasting class with their teacher, Joe Bryant, and they were all the way across the nation recently for National Awards recognition and cleaned up from what I saw and heard on social media. And so we wanted to have the students come and introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about the awards. And I even see they have them in their hands, so how exciting. I know that all of them weren't able to make it tonight. In fact, I know that our own student representative, Meghana, went with them and did very well as well. She's out ill tonight, so we'll get to see our student reps on the 28th. They're going to reschedule and come back then. But here's what we'd like to do is have our students all come forward together and each come to the mic, and you can use this podium over here. And someone suggested maybe using your tagline, because we know some of you have those radio taglines that are featured in everything that you do on the radio. And just share with us what your awards that you received were for. So come on up, and Joe, will you come up with the kids as well, because I know the board wants to hear your part in this as well. He's got some trophies there too.
Seattle to London, and my co-host is Gabe Gottesman, and we won Best Pre/Post-Game Show along with Max Tanzer, who is a senior, and Best Radio Drama, and who has helped me a lot through this process is my parents, Carolyn and Jim Purek.
Hello. Hello, I'm Gabe Gottesman. I'm a freshman. I have a show with Scott on Mondays and Fridays. I'd like to thank my mom, and my brother, Zach, and my dad, of course, my family, my dog. Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun. Thanks to Joe, of course. Max has really been a role model. He helped win us this award. He's a senior, and he's going off to college at Ithaca. I'd really like to thank him, of course, because without him, I don't think we would have been able to know anything we are doing right now.
Hi, I'm Allie Shoup, my co-host Natalie. You can listen to our show, 88.9 The Bridge, Mondays 4 to 6. And then we won Best News Interview for an interview with Lori Matsukawa, who works for King 5.
Thank your parents. Allie.
Again, as Allie said, we have a show every Monday from 4 to 6 on the road with Allie and Natalie. We've been doing our show for 3 years. I'm a junior this year, so I'm a part of this broadcasting program since I was a freshman and entered the doors as an intro radio student. And as she said, we won for Best Newscast with Lord Matsukawa, which was a really cool experience. And I want to thank my parents that are here in the front. My mom's in the pink, her name's Debbie, and my dad in the blue. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lila Schroff. I won Best Live Music Broadcast as a finalist for Best Celebrity Artist Interview, and then I won the top prize for Best Community News Coverage with Meghana, Best Political Interview, and Best Documentary. And I really want to say thank you to everybody that's a part of this program. It's an amazing class, and thank you to Joe especially, because this class really has let me embrace storytelling from a new angle. And then, of course, to my dad, Barrett Sham, in the back over there in the hat.
And I'm Joe. I just want to quickly say thank you so much to the board. These are nice, but what is really the true prizes are these kids, and I love teaching them. And if you want to hear something really special, tune in next Friday, the 22nd of March for a day of unity. This is something Megan kind of started. It is going to be all positive music, all positive messages, and anybody on Mercer Island that wants to have a voice and say how much you love this community and why, please come down to our studio. Our kids will record you. We invite the board, we invite the administration, anybody, and from 6 a.m. to midnight, all you're going to hear is positive messages from these guys. So thank you so much for letting us do this.
And now we would like you to come on up and bring your trophies and your teacher with you, because we're going to give a photo op here for all of the parents out there with their cameras. And I know Craig would like a photo as well. Joe, how many kids went to New York total?
We had, on the trip, we had 15 kids, 4 parents, and Vicki Puckett and myself. So we had a crew of 21. We won 20 awards overall, 8 for best in the nation. So last year we won 13. The year before we won 6. So we're a growing concern here. We're doing a little better every year. And now that Gabe has seen how it works, I expect we're going to win a lot more next year. This was his first trip, and he was taking notes.
Excellent. And we all love to listen to Joe's radio voice, too.
No, I want to lean into the mic, too. Okay.
We do have one more recognition.
Okay.
We have a proclamation which is attached to our agenda from Governor Jay Inslee regarding our educational support professionals. And this proclamation recognizes March 11th through 15th as Education Support Professionals Week. And I think it's really important to emphasize the part of these dedicated individuals deserve recognition and thanks for the outstanding they do for this state, their communities, and the students enrolled in Washington public schools and universities. I know that we as a district wouldn't be able to serve our students and have our students accomplish the way that they are able to without the support of our educational support professionals, also sometimes known as paraeducators. So we appreciate them and are pleased to share the governor's proclamation with the board as well.
Thank you for that. We will move on to 1D, public input. Is there anyone here for public input? No, not seeing any. I'll keep an eye out because typically we would do public input closer to 6, so there may be some folks that arrive a little bit later, and we'll keep an eye for that. 1E was a student representative report, which we will move to our...
We'll move that to our next meeting.
Okay, which takes us to 1F, superintendent report.
So just a few things, some of them the board might already be aware of. First up, the school district will present its 4th annual Pathfinder Awards to 4 graduates of Mercer Island High School whose achievements, strength of character, and citizenship inspire and challenge today's youth to make contributions to humankind. And so this year at our Schools Foundation breakfast on April 30th, we will be celebrating Caroline Frazier from the class of 1979, good year, author and winner of the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for Biography for her critically acclaimed book, Prairie Fires, which is about the life of author Laura Ingalls Wilder. I know I'm one of a favorite in my house, having a daughter who I think read every single one of those. So we are looking forward to Carolyn visiting here on the island and being with us. And I think I think Craig's even trying to set up something perhaps with Islander Books and with some of our students as well. The other recognition is kind of a family recognition, recognizing the Nordstrom brothers, Pete Nordstrom, class of 1980, Eric Nordstrom, class of 1981, and posthumously their brother Blake Nordstrom, class of 1978. And I think we all recognize the Nordstrom name as the co-presidents of Nordstrom, the Seattle-based fashion realtor. And they have also responded that they will be here for recognition at the breakfast as well. So great things happening with alumni from many years before. Next up in the report, a couple of you have seen the slide deck related to the values, vision, and mission statement that we've all worked on so diligently for the last year and a half. And so we are starting with focus groups, and we've had 3 now this week, starting with our administrative team, participated and helped us work out some of the technical glitches of using a new software. Thanks to Andres. He's been there with me step by step to help us through it. And then yesterday we did the PTA Council. So got great feedback in each of the 3 thoughts, so to speak, one being the values, one the vision, and one the mission. And then this morning, we met with the Superintendent Equity Advisor, so the first of the Superintendent Advisories, and went through the process again. We're learning a little better how to support and help the learners as they go through the technical piece, but getting great feedback and have at a minimum 15 more groups scheduled and waiting for some dates on some other ones. So I think we'll have potentially 20 different focus groups that we'll be meeting with, and some of you will get to sit in on that as well. I know 2 of our board directors have already kind of experienced how the thought exchange works, and we're refining it and making it better each time that we use it. And then lastly, I would just like to acknowledge the work that's gone on at Mercer Island High School, particularly this week. I think that in light of the actions that occurred last week that were anti-Semitic conduct from some students and the learning that has occurred for our students because of that has been really prevalent, of course, in the minds of our high school. They've had a lot of pieces that they've already worked through. On Monday, they did learning circles where the admin team worked with each of the Bridges segments. The coaches, our athletic coaches, received notice to speak with their teams, and they sent a letter. We worked with the admin team worked with ASB leaders and leadership groups to start dialogue about long-range planning for speaking out against prejudice and discrimination. They had a guest speaker from the Anti-Defamation League at their staff meeting recently. They did an event on March 8th, Blue Hearts on Hand, signifying healing and unity. On the 11th, the administration visited the classrooms to talk about school expectations and healing. On the 13th, they did a resolution of respect assembly for students, again during Bridges time, and one of the pieces from that was centered around the work with the Anti-Defamation League with No Place for Hate. And so to help us all recognize it, I have Vicki kindly got a pin for each of us to acknowledge that good work at the high school as well. Next week, they're planning some courageous conversation circles during their Bridges time. And then, as mentioned earlier this evening, the radio broadcasts by our students, and of course, inviting other community members for a day of unity in the community as well. So some good work, ongoing work, embedded work going on at the high school. And unless there's any questions on any of those pieces, that's all I have for this evening.
Seeing no questions, we'll move on to Section 2, Full Governance Process Monitoring. And 2A, we have Board Policy 1002, Governing Style. I thought maybe, if it works with the board, I'll read the introduction to it, and then we can move piece by piece through it until we come up with our final conclusion. So Board Policy 1002, Governing Style. This is a monitoring level 1. The board will govern lawfully with emphasis on Board Policy 2020 results for students, encourage diversity in viewpoints, focus on strategic leadership rather than administrative detail, observe clear distinction between board and superintendent roles, make collective rather than individual decisions, exhibit future orientation rather than past or present, and govern proactively rather than reactively accordingly. Or accordingly, and then Section 1, and I can go ahead and read that. The board will cultivate a sense of group responsibility. The board, not the superintendent or staff, will be responsible for excellent governance performance. The board will use the expertise of individual board members to enhance the performance of the board as a body, but will not substitute individual judgments and opinions for the board's collective values. So, I'll open that for discussion. Or if you'd like to make a motion of a compliance, and then with a second, then we can go into discussion from there.
I move that we find the board in compliance.
Second.
Okay, and discussion. Okay, so on this, I do want to bring forth a couple of things, specifically on number 1 here, and there's some things that it'll cover elsewhere in here as well. But under number 1, I wanted to bring to the attention of speaking with unity and not substituting individual judgments for opinions of the board's collective values. So in the last week, we had a couple of incidents where emails to the board or specific members were answered by a member of the board as opposed to the board president or the superintendent. And I bring that forward as a part of protocol. I think that'll go under roles and responsibilities later on as well. I don't know that it necessarily knocks us out of compliance, but also as we work as representatives and liaisons on behalf of the board through different groups, of ensuring that when we speak in those settings, that we're speaking with the voice of the board and not overriding the voice of the board with personal opinions in that space. I think having coffee with a constituent or whatever as an elected representative is one conversation, but when we're there specifically as representatives of the board, we should be really careful of what we're saying and that we're speaking on behalf of the board. Because we're there to represent that. So I want to put that on the table for some discussion of the group, and whether or not that we're in full compliance or not in full compliance, but rather a discussion about what that means to us and whether we can recommit to that moving forward.
It's been an interesting discussion. Usually what we've done is whenever we speak for the board, it's being done by the president. And the president is the person who speaks for the board. Now, clearly, all board members participate in a number of different school activities and are frequently called upon to speak, offer thoughts, input, ideas, perhaps even, represent what has happened in the boardroom. And in those cases, it's not the same official speech as when the president speaks for the board. And I think that's been our norm so far, that people have been allowed to provide their opinions at other events. I mean, clearly we can't have a discussion with the board before saying, I think red would be a nice color for the, for the shirt or something like that. So, yeah, I think there's a bit of freedom of speech involved versus, when we're actually speaking for the board. And I think it's most clear when there's need in an official capacity to speak for the board that the president is there and the president does that. And all other instances, we are carrying, our individual representation of what's happened at the boardroom, and it's really not in the same official capacity.
I think that's fair to say. When we're asked a specific question and we know what the board has agreed on or had as a policy, I think it's fair for us to respond. I think, I'm not sure if this is maybe what's happened that you're thinking of is when one of us or two of us get an email from a community member, and then what is the protocol? Do we only forward that on to you, or do we respond and copy you if it's something that's like a generally agreed upon stance or line that we say? I do think bringing up the part about not substituting individual judgments and opinions for the board's collective values. There have definitely been times I've noticed when we're in a board meeting and an individual may express an opinion and I think it's important that that's stated to be an opinion, and sometimes it might be stated in a manner that appears to be a fact or it's a judgment. And so I think we would all do better to make it clear when something's our opinion and to agree or even disagree respectfully by saying I disagree. And I think that points out that it's an opinion, because we have to be able to have discussion and while we speak with one voice, we're not one person, and debate is healthy. But I think where it crosses the line is when someone says, no, it's actually this, when it may be a perspective or an opinion. So that's my 2 cents.
Any more? Director Jorgensen? Vice President Lurie?
Yeah, I have a feeling this is my email.
There was more than one.
Well, I'm not aware of the other ones, so it's difficult to understand what that is. At least for my email, and I'm not sure which email is triggering this, I clearly, and underline, speaking as an individual school board member, not on behalf of either the board or the district. I think constituents email us. I agree with the president saying going to coffee is good. I think email is fine too. Not apologetic for anything I stated. I thought it was well thought out and reasoned. I did follow up with an email, like I have always done, and stated the mutual and shared respect, and stated that this specific item I thought fell under a specific school and superintendent thing, and encourage them to reach out because it's under that, in order to empower the people that work with the district. But to expect that when we receive emails from constituents that we're not going to be able to email back our own personal thoughts, as long as it's not something that's already been previously decided on by the board. I think that's a freedom of speech issue, and I think we're all best served when people can share their thoughts, as long as they're constructive and as long as they're respecting the chain of command and mutual shared respect. And to the extent that my email fell out of line with that, I think there was another process that should have been taken to address that, which is under process for addressing board member violations. Because if that's what's going on right here, there is a clear process for taking that on, as opposed to doing it this way.
I will say I didn't know there was some specific action going on here, because I did respond to some email yesterday as well. So I'm a little confused if there's a specific action being called out. So that's actually quite
No specific
problematic.
action was intended to be called out here other than there's a pattern emerging.
I would also like to say one thing. As being the board president, I have been the recipient, as well as the board members, of recipient of emails. I am would expect board members to email, and having been on the board as a president, I respect that it's kind of nice to know what's going on as a president. And so towards that end, whenever I have responded, as when we've had multiple presidents here, I've always tried to be courteous and CC the president. And so there's another avenue too, and that's not to do that. And so I would hate for this to be kind of a heavy-handed.
I wasn't waiting to respond. I was just still thinking. Processing for me takes a little time. The only thing that concerns me is my own personal practice is I tend to not respond to emails that are directed at the entire board, letting the president do that. I think there's a difference between responding by email when it's a board-directed email versus if it's an individual member. I think we need to be careful about responding in writing to emails, individually to emails that are directed to the board, because they're reaching out to the board, not to an individual board member. And I also encourage, outside discussions. It's frustrating that things in writing and verbal conversations need to be treated a little bit differently. Unfortunately, words in writing travel, and words orally don't travel as much. And in, like I said, when it's directed to the entire board, I think it's appropriate that the president responds. If we wanted, I'm certainly open to discussion for changing it. That maybe I misunderstood our policy and the way that we've always done things. I don't know if this has happened before. I wasn't hugely put off by it. I was a little bit surprised by it, but certainly not offended. I think it's a good time just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And just kind of a recheck. It's probably very unusual. I think it's unusual that the least experienced board members are holding leadership positions. So it's just a change in dynamics and something that we'll all figure out. I don't think there's any ill will, and I think it's just making sure that we're on the same page. I mean, as far as I'm concerned.
So in this, and I think roles and responsibilities we're also going to monitor tonight, and that's in our next piece in the agenda. So specifically for the protocols and those things pertaining to the email, I think maybe that falls well under that. I bring this up here under number 1 on this particular policy, because I think it is important, at least for me, and we'll see if you agree or not, that last line, that we will not substitute individual judgments and opinions for the board's collective values. So the power of the board doesn't lie in any individual member. Certainly as community members and public figures, what we say matters and has weight. And there is a time and place for us to share personal opinions and to express ourselves that way. For me, functioning as a representative of the board, we are one of 5. And I jokingly talk about the Borg Collective for Star Trek fans. I say that I'm 2 of 5 is my designation. So I try when I speak in an official capacity, whether it's as a liaison to a PAC meeting or to equity, there are times where I can share a piece of professional development or something that's come through, but when a specific question comes to the district about policy or whatever, or the thoughts of the board, where does the board stand on this, or the district stand on this, my default is to go back, what do I know for sure that the board has said, what is our policy, and what is embedded? Have we made an official statement on this? And any official statement that the 5 of us or a majority of the quorum has stated is the official opinion and value of the board. So it's that team together, team apart. The time for deliberation is when the 5 of us are together, when we have quorum. That's when we are in a public meeting. We're able to debate, we're able to deliberate and share those opinions and come to it. But once we make that decision, then that is a value and opinion of the board as a whole. And so to me, if we're representing the board out in the community, then in that capacity, we should be representing the values and voice of the board as a whole. And if we don't have a specific answer that we can reply with in that area, then it's best to send it either back to the board, put a place marker to discuss it with the board at an appropriate time. You get what I'm saying, so that we as a group have a chance to set that voice and value, and thereby making sure that an individual judgment or opinion does not override the board's collective value or voice. And so it's that, and I've heard it described as team together, team apart, that when the team is together, we debate and we make decisions, and once we make that decision, and as we move into the community, that's the decision that was made, and we support that decision, regardless of how we voted for it or discussed it in the meeting. And I think this filters throughout, and I don't think it comes into the roles and responsibilities. Now, that's my opinion, and if the board doesn't feel that way through a majority of the quorum, and we have a full quorum tonight, then that establishes the precedent for protocol moving forward. My concern is if we have 5 individual board members offering 5 individual interpretations or opinions on a specific matter in the community, that's confusing for our constituents. It doesn't necessarily benefit our board and our institution in gaining trust and reliability. So the best way to ensure that we are trustworthy to our constituents is that we have healthy debate when we're together, and when we're apart, that we hold true to the values as stated of the collective.
Don't buy it. I think as a board, we've got a limited amount of time. There are certain things we discuss and debate and come to a board consensus. There are umpteen bazillion, technical term, things that, are discussed in the community, have merit to provide an opinion or thought on, or guidance, or coaching, or help, that, yes, you may get 10 different opinions from 5 board members. And I think there's value in providing that guidance, thoughtfulness, coaching, based on board, other board policies that we've developed over time. And I don't think we want to squelch free speech. I mean, the 435 congressmen, 100 senators still have individual opinions, and the only thing that counts is the legislation they pass, which is multitudes less than the opinions they're asked to render, the thoughts they're asked to give. Similar with city council, similar with school board. I think there are many ways that we can be coaches and effective statesmen without having it be board policy and rising to that level. We'd never be able to keep up, and I think you would squelch free speech amongst board members. I think it would prevent discussion with the community to find out what's valuable, what isn't, what's the best way to access the board, what's the best way to make progress on an idea. So we're not about squelching free speech of individual members at all. And I think it's approaching a very heavy-handed reading of this policy.
Any final thoughts, discussion?
Without really knowing what we're talking about, it's hard to know what's going on here.
I would agree with that too, but
I was agreeing with what you were saying. and I'm kind of surprised at your reaction. That I don't know what we're talking about, so I
I thought it was a
that may
mail
be
you
why.
and I received, which I forwarded on.
This is not about a specific incident. This is about this particular
I
section
don't
of
think
this
so.
monitoring.
I think there's something else. But anyway, I would hope that you would have an individual conversation with anybody who crossed a line that you're talking about. So, yeah, I think we do all interpret this differently. And it's hard to know when to speak up and say, you know, this incident doesn't really follow this. And I tend to err on the side of, well, I'm not going to bring that up because maybe I'm just being petty. So that's where I'm at. But nothing you said did I find offensive or out of line, Brian. So I just want to give you that feedback.
May I just weigh in with a quick reminder that remember at our next meeting, you will have your language review that will include, so if there's a sense that is perhaps the right wording here, you are allowed to review that at the next meeting to determine if there's, sometimes words mean different things to different people, so that might be a helpful piece as you work through this process.
So not having the ability to see all emails that are being discussed, and I think 4 of us are in that situation. I can only address the one email I'm looking at, which I was party to. This discussion, the question, the topic, wasn't a board, at least as I interpreted it, wasn't a decision we had made at the board, and I wasn't speaking counter to anything. I do appreciate that the board president has a responsibility to speak on behalf of the board on board decisions, but when things are tossed out, that requests, et cetera, which the board has not discussed, I think it's fair to engage a discussion with a constituent. And I don't see a difference between email and words. In fact, I think we hold ourselves to a higher accountability when we use email, because it's very easy to deny what could be said in a cafe. So, you know, it wasn't a determined decision by the board. I specified it was an individual, speaking as an individual school board member, not on behalf of the board or the district. And I also since referred to the mutual shared respect. So, I mean, if that's wrong, wow, that's a freedom of speech issue. And I don't know. And the other question is, before my response, that constituent had sent an email and there was no response. And not being responsive to people who are sending us emails, I think, can be very damaging too.
I don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Okay, so again, bringing us back, so the motion on the floor is to find in full compliance or not in compliance on this particular item, number 1, in Board Policy 1002, governing style. And I'd say that it pertains to this, not a particular incident, and it's not a rebuke or statement to an individual board director. It was not my intent with bringing up the discussion. But give a moment to reread number 1 here on 1002, governing style, section 1, and then we'll take the vote, unless there's any other questions or points of clarification.
So you raised a concern here. I guess my question would be, do you feel we're not in compliance? And is that the discussion we should be having? Maybe we didn't hit the discussion we need to have before taking the vote. And so I'll just ask, do you feel we're not in compliance because you raised it?
I'm answering that question. I think we're on the line. In my view of the board, since we last monitored this, I've been around a few instances where I feel that a personal opinion of a board member has been included as a part of an answer to a board policy or a board value, and it has been a concern of mine. And so I think at this point, and because it doesn't necessarily impact the entirety of compliance with this, I would vote not in compliance.
And then I would follow that up then, since you're concerned about individual actions. Have you reached out to the individuals and informed them of these actions prior, at the time off or prior to this event? Now, I guess I thought you were talking about email that I had just forwarded yesterday, but you have not reached out to me. So I guess that's not the case. Have you informed the board members of potential violations, I guess?
In particular, I reached out to one board member early in the year, never received a response back from that board member, and so my outreach fell flat. In another instance, I did have a conversation with a board member, which was left somewhat unresolved. And so I'm left feeling, in a sense of monitoring this particular thing overall, that the board is not necessarily in compliance of this particular item, and that we could be doing better. That, of course, is not the opinion of the board. It's one opinion of the board. And I think either in language review or whatever, if it's agreed, and it's a commonly shared opinion, that we can either fine-tune the language of the policy or the protocol used to ensure that it changes. But that is determined by the outcome of this particular vote, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm actually just really, I'm just more than a little confused, because right now you hold all the cards and nobody else has any appreciation for your concerns, and you've raised it for the first time in the monitoring of this policy. And then you're suggesting you'd be voting against this policy, and you're the only one who sees these cards. It's one, against board policy of no surprises. It's a little odd. Two, usually for a policy like this, board members would have been informed up front. I don't know if it's fallen flat, I'd try again, because it's a pretty serious violation. I don't think you'd let them fall flat. And as board president, that's kind of incumbent upon you to do that. Number three, I take it pretty seriously, because board president holds the cards here. You are the one who knows what's happening at the board table, and that's pretty serious. So there's a problem here, in there's a sign of dysfunction, actually.
I would like to suggest that we maybe table this motion so that some background discussion could happen on your part, so that any particular board members aware of a potential violation, and then maybe we can bring it back at a future meeting, at the next meeting, perhaps. Anybody?
The other thing we have had on these is the whole goal of these has been to be forward-looking and to fix we're a learning environment. We've got, as you point out, new president and vice president, so the norms actually have not been carried forward around the way these things are being handled. So the other possibility is to vote on compliance based on what we know now, and put in a comment that we should address these underlying concerns that only you are privy to, kind of on a separate timetable independent of this. Because I think if this is a problem that the board has, it's pretty serious. I don't know if I can vote not in compliance or in compliance, you put me in a very tough spot by surprising me like this.
Yeah, I'd agree on, I mean, there is a board policy for addressing board member violations, and I believe the president is supposed to have a conversation with that board member. So it sounds like there was an email that wasn't responded to, and it sounds like maybe you engaged in conversation, but to me, it doesn't sound like you've sat down with somebody to have that conversation. And under this violation policy, there's an opportunity to cure. You know, it talks about continuing. So I don't know if there's one person or multiple people, but whoever it is, they haven't really been informed yet, and they haven't had the opportunity to cure, and you're coming down and in a way prejudging before they've had an opportunity to cure. And so I think, yeah, I don't know what to do in this case. You mentioned it wasn't this email, but then I looked at this email where you've addressed my email and you said FYI for discussion for tomorrow night. So I assume it is this email. Or are we discussing this later on the agenda?
It does come up in discussion here as overarching with several points within compliance of these documents, but it's not the one and only.
Okay.
And it was not my intent to bring that email into public record, per se. It is in public record, but not to necessarily share it here. My goal was not to share a specific. And this is not a discussion about a violation of a board member, but my opinion as to whether or not we are in compliance with this piece of the policy.
I think it's appropriate to vote on compliance today. I think, I'm trying to remember who actually said vote and then have a discussion.
Yeah, I moved initially to vote us in compliance, and it was
Right, no, but
seconded.
I mean, when we were talking about what to do today.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, that was
yeah.
me too.
Okay, that's what I thought. I think, I just want to add, and I'm not privy to everything, all of the concerns either. In my line of work, people are found in compliance or not in compliance daily. So what we often, and these are over 6-month periods, basically, it's the same thing. So what we often do is substantial compliance is compliance. That, we have hundreds of discussions and hundreds of opinions and lots of policies. And to pull a couple of things that, are, raise an eyebrow, but not a clear, direct violation, I don't think, in my opinion, rises to the level of not in compliance. And I would just encourage us to look at this in terms of substantial compliance. There's no expectation of perfection or 100% when you're looking at so many interactions.
So, sorry, I was going to move that we find the board in compliance on number 1.
And that's standing. That's the motion that we're discussing now.
Okay.
So, yeah. We are down in the weeds a bit, so. But that motion is on and seconded. And I also just want to point out as a matter of practice here that at the bottom, with the determination of the board, we can find in full compliance. We can also find in compliance with noted exceptions. There are several options on this, which is why I opted to go one at a time. And so if there's no other discussion about this particular one, we can move forward to a vote. I'm not seeing any other discussion. So the motion is to find the board in compliance of Board Policy 1002, Section 1. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Nay. So the board finds in
I
compliance.
abstain.
Oh, sorry.
I'm abstaining.
And 1 abstention. So 3 yea, 1 nay, and 1 abstention. Thank you. I apologize. Okay, we'll move on to Section 2. Director D'Souza, would you like to read this?
Sure. The board will hold itself accountable for the quality of its governing performance. This self-discipline will apply to attendance, preparation for meetings, adherence to the principles of the board's governing model, respects of roles, and ensuring the long-term capacity for excellent governance to the district. To ensure that the board's business meetings are conducted with maximum effectiveness and efficiency, the members will A. Come to meetings adequately prepared. B. Deal with each other, the superintendent, staff, and public with a sense of courtesy and collegiality. C. Keep the emotional tone of their comments neutral. D. Limit repetitive comments on a single issue. E. Focus their attention first on large values important to the district and conserve their time and energy for the task by declining to address smaller issues of lesser importance. Evaluate decisions based on the Evaluate decisions based on the weighting of the costs and benefits to the district. G. Accept reasonable approaches chosen by the superintendent. And H. Be cautious and deliberate in giving instructions to the superintendent. So I move we find the board in compliance of number 2 as read.
I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to find the board in compliance of Board Policy 1002, Section 2. Discussion.
I think this is somewhat reflective on the first one. My focus would be on the board focusing the attention on large values important to the district, which is the items in our agenda, as opposed to random email that comes across our table. So I think I'd highlight that as relevant to the first one.
I'm looking for any other comments or discussion. Okay, seeing none. Again, number 2 along with number 1, specifically in respect to roles. And some of it of limiting repetitive comments. Part of that is just kind of how we're generally behaving as a board. And maybe it's that we're getting more comfortable with each other, that and tension is good with the board, but I've noticed that there has been some repetitive action happening, some things like that happen in our meetings. So while I don't think it's enough to find everything out of compliance, I do think that we're towing the line on here. I think that we could be holding ourselves more accountable for the quality of our meetings and the work that we do as board members. And in regard to your comment, Director D'Souza, we are the only ones at this point, outside of something big legally happening, we are essentially the only ones that are holding ourselves accountable for the work that we do. And that's what happens in this particular monitoring right now. And so I think in this particular case, to address these issues of board behavior and expectations and recalibrating that as necessary and aligning helps us to perform better as a unit, as a group of 5, because we are here as a group of 5. Unlike an individual representative that might be elected to the Senate or the House of Representatives, we are elected to a board of 5. No individual has any individual power on this board. It is only through collective action that we have power to do our job. So.
I'm reluctant to bring this up, kind of based on what I was saying earlier. And I haven't spoken to this board member directly about this, but I do feel like there was an instance that was repeatedly brought up, was not always respectful, and that there was some action that was taken individually that was not sanctioned by the board. And that it was because it seemed like the person didn't find the superintendent's approach reasonable. And I'm just going to mention that it does bring me, it has brought me pause to find us in compliance on this one. But like I said, I haven't brought it up before. And but since we are going over this so thoroughly, I feel compelled to just make that statement now and put it out there. So.
See, I would. If there are frictions with policy that were not compliant, I would encourage all individual board members to bring this up with the board president at the time it occurs. I think doing this after the fact, and especially if it hasn't been mentioned before, it's difficult to kind of improve, especially if the person hasn't been told. I think these type of things need to kind of, in order for us to find ourselves non-compliance, I think we need to have specific examples. Otherwise, we're kind of guessing in the dark. Board President, you mentioned repetitive comments. I'm not sure which comments you're referring to. So I don't know if you want to mention that, but if we're interested in learning, we need to have a little bit of self-reflection at the time, not when we don't know what things are being referred to.
Just in general, I think I've said this before, probably the last time we evaluated ourselves. Self-reflection is really good. Being the only ones to evaluate us as a whole is very strange to me. Self-reflection, again, is important, and I think this is a really productive discussion, making sure that we're all on the same page and handling matters effectively and efficiently. Just in general, of finding ourselves in compliance or not in compliance, is just a subject I'm not particularly comfortable with.
I would say a wise person I overheard today say something along the lines of discomfort is a sign that we're learning. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I don't consider, in this sense, finding a single piece of this out of compliance to be an overarching failure on anyone's behalf. I think it might be indicative that there's a difference in opinion and that people may feel that we can do a better job. And that would be my sense in approaching these things, is that I think that we as a board can be doing a better job, and that this is the proper place to share that opinion overarchingly as we function as a group. So without calling it a specific detail to attention, and it has been called out at least once within a board meeting. But this is in reflection since the last time we've monitored the job. And so for me personally, I feel like there are some areas in here where we, as a board, collectively, can improve our style, and that we're either towing the line, and I would actually move to being not in compliance on this particular one as well because of a couple things. But again, that doesn't mean that I believe that we're a failure as a board. And maybe it's because I'm holding us to a higher standard. And that is a personal thing, that I have higher expectations. And so...
Yeah, it just confuses me completely. But, I'm happy to vote us not in compliance of all these, because I could pick something. It almost, when you don't have details about what you're being judged on, and you don't have details about your problems, and then you're being said, you screwed up somewhere. I can't tell you anything else about it. At that point, I'm not really interested in the test you're giving me, and you don't take it seriously. And I think we've actually come to that. You raised something that I didn't know what you were talking about. Ralph seems to know, and Deborah seems to know what you're talking about. I thought it was mail that was sent to Tracy and me. So there's one invisible thing that got that voted no compliance. Now Tracy has raised another invisible thing that has gotten us no compliance. I think this is spiraling down the drain very quickly. I mean, this is not the way a learning institution works. If we rated our superintendent and held our superintendent accountable by saying, don't like what you did, can't tell you when, can't tell you what, I think we'd lose a superintendent pretty quickly. So I'm super concerned at the route you've taken us down as president of the board on these things. I don't think you're holding us to a higher standard. You've not given us a standard to hold ourselves to. And there is no standard when you can secretly say something that we're not in compliance, so vote it in public record, and then move on as if nothing has happened. It's very, very concerning to me. And I value what the president says, because the president has a lot more information than any individual one of us. And so that's super problematic for me to even vote in compliance. But this road you're taking us down scares me.
None of us are perfect, and I'm sure we are all learning. Confrontation is hard about some of these things, and I will admit that's why I often don't say anything, is this is hard. But at the same time, I think it is important to talk about, because we do have a standard, and it's written right here. This is the standard. And if some of us are feeling uncomfortable about voting us in compliance, I think this is an appropriate time to bring it up. Yes, it would have been more ideal if we had discussed things with people ahead of time, and that's why in the last round, I suggested that we postpone this and maybe do our due diligence and talk to individuals and then come back and finish this process. That would be my suggestion again.
If that's a motion, I second that. I think that's a good idea.
Well, we have a motion on the table, so I will propose to amend the motion by saying I think we should table this to the next meeting. So is that what you would second?
Yes.
So what are we tabling? Item number 2 or the whole thing?
Well, that would be very different. We are, because we're not doing a motion for the entire document yet, right now we are simply focused on the motion to find in compliance of 1002, is it 1002, is that right? Point 2, essentially. So it's, the amendment could be to move that particular item to a future thing. And there is, in this particular document, it just so happens, if we look at the bottom, dates for remonitoring if necessary. So if for some reason, which has not happened yet, the board were to find in compliance with noted exceptions, we could address those noted exceptions later. In response to it, as an overarching incident, and not, again, I repeat, my intention is not to call out any individual person right now, and at no point have I brought forward personally a violation of our code of conduct. But I feel personally, not as the president, but as an individual member, that there are certain aspects of this that I think that we have been undisciplined in. And specifically, I have seen a pattern of repetitive comments on a single issue, where instead of bringing new material to the board, it's simply a repetition of the same stated opinion from before, which begins to break down and lead to longer meetings and longer deliberations, because we keep getting stuck in a rut with one or two board members repeating the same comment again and again. And that can also be a tool used in debate to make other parties uncomfortable or to control the opinion of the room. If you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, eventually people wear down and it becomes assumed as the opinion of the group. And that has happened. There's a pattern of that happening over the last year throughout our meetings. It's not one particular issue, but it's something that I personally have noted happening. I do believe that we have loosened the protocol about the respective roles. And in the sense, and because it's happened multiple times, it's not one particular time, where instead of allowing the president or the superintendent to respond to an email, another individual has done that, and now it's difficult for the president to respond officially. It's easier for the superintendent to respond, difficult for the president to respond, and CC everyone on the board, because now we're gaining momentum towards quorum, and we're riding that line of violating a public meeting law. The reason that one voice, and in our policies is stated that the president speaks on behalf of the board outside of a meeting of the board, is to ensure that we don't accidentally fall into quorum and violate a Public Meetings Act. And this includes if two board members discuss information, one of them brings it to an outside meeting where another board member is present, and it gets commented on there, well, now you have inadvertently included 3 board members in a piece of information or governance. I've seen that happen multiple times over the last year. And while it's at a point where I don't believe it violated public meeting laws, I think we're getting dangerously close to that. And so as an overarching, holding our board accountable personally, do I feel that we are hitting all of these metrics in this particular item? As of right now, I don't know that we are. But that one vote of, I feel that we're not in compliance, does not speak on behalf of the board. It's not asserting my opinion over the board. And depending on how we vote on that, we move forward. To that, with the additional motion on the floor, we could table it. But I think tabling it takes this conversation now into a private room, which is not transparent and is not in the view. This is an opportunity to have this discussion honestly, with vulnerability, and be courageous about it here in public, and find, do we feel collectively that we are in full compliance with this, or is there work that we can be doing to improve?
So I don't know. I will just say real quick. As president of the board, you're privy to more information than the rest of us, and especially for something like this, your vote would count heavily. So I'm concerned when you say there are problems, and as president, you can't step out of that role in the boardroom, actually, especially when self-monitoring.
If I can respond to that, and then...
Actually, can I speak?
All right.
I appreciate Director Drinkwater's suggestion. I don't know if it was a motion or to suspend. Okay. I appreciate that. But I think we're going to be more productive if we're forward-looking. And I think right now we're going to be looking in reverse for quite a while. And I think we're also going to be bringing up things, and it's going to be tempted for other people to bring up things. I think we have a responsibility to bring things up at the moment or reasonable time within that time frame if people feel offended, if people feel that the board policy broken. I think the board president has a responsibility to pull someone aside, have a special meeting with them, and inform them. But I think going through this right now, and with nobody on this board having had that benefit of having, hey, a corrective action discussion, you're not really giving opportunities for people to cure. I mean, and I think that's important, especially since this is televised, it's public. We all want to do our best, and we're all vested. And so as the board president, I encourage you, if there's a concern at the time, pull someone aside that week and bring it up. Don't wait 3 months or 4 months to a policy and then bring it up, because it's not going to be forward-looking then.
So that's a two-part. All right. I'll try to make it brief. So in relation to roles, and my role as president, if I thought that there was a conflict of interest, it is embedded with our policies that I could remove myself from facilitation of a discussion and turn that over to the vice president to facilitate that discussion, or any other member of our board. We are all capable of facilitating that discussion if the president is unable to facilitate that discussion. And we are perhaps at that point in regard to this policy. If the board feels that I should be functioning as an individual member and somebody else should be facilitating this discussion, then we can address that, and I can step aside for the remainder of this discussion. I'm perfectly happy to do that. This was brought up in an earlier meeting with Director Drinkwater. And you were still president at the time. It happened in a special session or a study session. And you had mentioned on record that you found it difficult at times to be president and also have that personal opinion within. And we had a discussion of, well, you should be able to step out of that and hand facilitation over to someone else if you feel that you can't wear that. And again, we're the only ones that can facilitate this meeting, these meetings, and it's up to us as a board to function in that manner as what appropriate. So in the sense, I'm facilitating or attempting to, as president, is my job, but I'm also as an individual board member expressing my opinion that I don't feel that we're in full compliance. I think that we're mostly in compliance with number 2.2. I don't find that we're in full compliance. And second, forward thinking versus thinking back. Everything about what we're doing right now is about reflecting over our work since the last time this was monitored. This is not intended at this point to be forward thinking. The forward thinking part is at our next regular meeting when we review the language concerning this particular policy. So right now is a time for reflection. So in the motion that's currently to table this item until a future meeting, I would say I would rather keep the conversation here and now, keep it high level and broad. It's not pointed and it's not identifying a violation of any particular board member, but speaking to how I feel about our style, our governance style as a whole as it pertains to 1002.2. So the motion is to table this item to a future meeting.
And was it seconded?
It was.
I seconded it. I'm overall, I think we're a really well-functioning board that has thought-provoking discussions, and everyone is respectful of everyone's opinions. There's tiny little blips along the way that we all have everywhere, and I think it would really benefit our group if we postpone monitoring board policy 1002 for 2 weeks until the next meeting, so that there can be some individual conversations that can be much more specific. I think if those are done, I think we'll all, I mean, at this point, I think, at least myself, second guessing, what should I have done different? I think that's the important reflective nature, but I also think Ralph's comments about having the opportunity to correct, and we're all growing and learning in this experience as well. I think that's really important. Not being in compliance, I take it very seriously. As I said, it's something that I see on a daily basis and can have substantial consequences. I'm not suggesting that we go hash out every little thing and have lots of discussions outside the public purview, but if most of us don't know at least something that we're talking about here, most of us don't need to know necessarily something that we're talking about here, because it seems like it's not one versus one, but an issue that two people can resolve after having a discussion, or hopefully can resolve after having a discussion. I think giving these 2 weeks to do this, because I think that we've been such a well-functioning board, I think would benefit all of us. This shouldn't be, finding the board not in compliance should be something that people are a whole lot more sure of than I think that they are. And being able to have that discussion and allow time for collective or corrective action, or at least reflection as to whether or not you agree with the person who's got the concern, I think would really be really beneficial. So I'd like to amend the motion that we move the monitoring of Board Policy 1002 as a whole to the next meeting.
I think,
Oh, hold on. I'm sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt, but we're now getting into an
Second.
amendment of an amendment. So, and we have a second. So,
I'll withdraw my first amendment and second Deborah's amendment.
okay. So it's to table, the current motion and second is to table discussion of Board Policy 1002, governing style, to our next regular board meeting.
One point of clarification. Do you mean 1 stands as is, because you've already voted on that one, and so it will be 2 through 8?
My preference would be to withdraw the vote on number 1 and monitor the entire
Remonitor.
board policy at the same time. I don't know if that's allowed.
There's a section for remonitoring, so we can say that we're going to remonitor in 2 weeks and go in that route rather than that direction. I think you can do that.
when we remonitor, we will probably want to revisit number 1, but it's already been voted on, so I don't
So you could
think we can
remonitor number
erase it.
1, table 2 through, 8 to monitor at your next meeting.
That's my motion.
Okay, so the current motion on the floor is to remonitor 1002.1 and table points 2 through 8 until our next regular board meeting. Does that make sense to everyone? Does that?
so,
Yes.
I just
So
want
we need a second on that.
Second.
Okay. And now we're open for discussion. Please, Director Jorgensen.
So I think I am going to vote against this, and just because I'd like us to kind of in respect to Director Lurie's comment about we're not necessarily perfect, but I think we've all observed the board over the past year, and I believe we've been in compliant. I think we could have the president pull aside individuals that he's thinking, or individual directors that feel that things have been violated, and we do that. But again, I think those type of things are better done real time than collectively at the end. And then I think we're also going to be in a predicament 2 weeks from now where some individual board members may have been pulled aside, but some other people are still going to be in the dark. So we'll still be in the dark.
Yeah, I think I would vote against. I'd vote against the motion on the table. I think we should move forward and monitor this. I think it's better to get all the issues out, and at least so we know what we have to cover here. I think the goal is remedial, not punishment. And I think by waiting 2 weeks, we're going to go back, I don't know how long now, and pull nits out. I mean, I could pull nits out all day and find everything not in compliance, but that's not super productive. I think there's clearly some concern around, email issues. Clearly some concern around repetitive comments or conduct in the board. I think there's clearly some concern around what does the president do versus individual board members. And I think maybe those are topics we should discuss and get on the same page with, which are much more specific than this. And I think they might fit in here in some way, but I think those specific issues are important to discuss. When they're specific, we can talk about them in a forward-thinking way and not in the context of punitive voting and reset norms. I think clearly there's been a loss of some norms here, and let's reset them kind of much more directly without digging up the past, as I think we're going down that route in a very, very negative way. And I think that'll lead to animosity, punishment, ill feelings, and, as Director Jorgensen said, zero clarity for the 3 members who were not involved in any one-on-one discussions. So I vote against it, and I vote we move forward. So let's uncover what other issues the board needs to discuss kind of at a higher level to get our norms understood.
We're not voting just yet, but just in discussion, but thank you. Any other points of discussion?
I think everyone brings up good points. We could go either way. It's just what we want to do tonight.
So kind of holding towards the back and trying not to be repetitive. So I think with members in the dark, I think that's been mentioned as a theme, and we could go try to resolve this more individually, but now we've got the 5 of us meeting in private in whichever set of combinations, essentially discussing board business, and so that begins to raise questions as well. So I would not personally, before moving it or monitoring later, I would rather move ahead here, and without a sense of it being punitive or a punishment, but just really an honest expression of how each individual feels we're doing on this particular item.
Well, and number 7 does say that the board will monitor its process and performance at least twice a year through a debriefing process.
Mhm.
So I think that's what we're deep in right now, is a debriefing process. And there is a point at the end of the monitoring document that says in compliance with noted exceptions, and we could decide that we want to remonitor in 3 months instead of 6 or 9 or 12.
So in the motion to remonitor number point 1 and table 2 through 8 to the next board meeting is where we are. Are there any more discussion or comments on that? Seeing none, I'm trying to make sure I give enough time. So we'll go ahead and vote on that. So the motion is to remove 1002 board governance from this agenda and remonitor number 1 in 2 weeks and monitor 2 through 8 in 2 weeks is the motion and second on the table. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay.
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 Any abstentions? No. Okay. So that motion is struck, and we return to the original motion, which is about in full compliance or not in compliance on Board Policy 1002, Governing Style, Point 2. Any final discussion on that opportunity to address it as we're coming back to that? Okay, I don't see any. So all in favor of finding the board in full compliance of 1002.2 indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Any abstentions? Okay, so the vote is 3-2. The board is in full compliance. Moving on to 1002.3, Director Drinkwater, would you mind reading?
The board will direct, control, and inspire the district through the careful establishment of written policies reflecting the board's values and perspectives. The board's major policy focus will be on the annual and incremental progress toward intended long-term benefits for students, not on the administrative or programmatic means of attaining those benefits. Accordingly, members will not A, assume responsibility for resolving operational problems or complaints, and or B, give personal direction to any part of the operational organization.
So the president would entertain a motion to find in compliance or not in compliance, in full compliance or not in compliance.
I move that we find the board in compliance of number 3.
I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, and so discussion. I see eyes on monitor, so I'm giving a pause for everyone to think. Do you have anything? Director Drinkwater? Thoughts? Director Jorgensen? Director Lurie? I don't have comments. The motion is to find the board in compliance with Board Policy 1002.3. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Any abstentions? So the vote is 4-1. Okay. So we move on to point 4. Director Jorgensen, would you mind reading?
Continuous board development will include orientation of candidates for the board and new members of the board about the board's governance process and periodic board discussion and evaluation of its process to assure continued improvement.
The President will entertain a motion.
I move we find the board in compliance of number 4.
Second.
Okay. There's a motion to find the board in compliance of Board Policy 1002.4. Any discussion? I'm not seeing any. I will add a comment on there that I think we're rocking this one. I think we're doing a great job on this one. So, any other comments? No. Okay, so all in favor of finding the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002.4, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, it passes unanimously. Moving on to 1002.5, Director Lurie, or Vice President Lurie, I'm sorry.
The board will hold a study session for the purposes of candidate orientation in the event of any upcoming board vacancies. Vacancies include an open position which needs to be filled due to the resignation of a board member, as well as an upcoming election, whether the current incumbents are planning to choose to file to run or not. I move that we find the board in compliance.
The motion is to find the board in full compliance with Board Policy 1002.5. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? It passes unanimously in full compliance. Moving on to Board Policy 1002.6. The board will not will allow no officer, individual, or committee of the board to hinder its performance or prevent its fulfilling its policy commitments. There we go. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion that we're compliant.
Second.
Okay. The motion is that the board is in full compliance with Board Policy 1002.6. Any discussion? Seeing none at this time, then all in favor of finding the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002.6 indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Any abstention? No. Okay. We'll move on to Board Policy 1002.7. Director D'Souza, would you mind?
The board will monitor its process and performance at least twice a year through a debriefing process. Self-monitoring will include a comparison of the board's performance with policies of the Administrative and Board Policies Series 1000.
I move we find the board in compliance of number 7.
A second.
So we're regularly monitoring that 1000 series all the way through. I do have a question of whether we're really taking the time to debrief. And in that sense, I wonder if perhaps we would look into a board survey, or I know WASDA has a model that we can utilize to where independently we can go in and provide input, and then is delivered back with metrics and data that we can use to engage a conversation and debrief. So I'm not sure. I look at this one wondering if we're truly debriefing or if we're just really sitting on, just relying on checking those boxes and not really thinking about it.
I think something that could help is if we bring back those exit surveys that we did. I think that would be an opportunity for individual board members to kind of reflect on kind of the conduct of the board, and that always kind of gave us an anonymous kind of tally at the following meeting, and I think that's a helpful reminder to individual board members.
Any other comments or discussion?
I think I also see this as more an interest in continuous improvement, as opposed to waiting 6 months. So I'm still and I don't quite understand their debriefing process either. I don't think, the idea for the board policy is that the president take people aside and have that discussion. And then we also had a retreat in which board norms, could have been brought up and a discussion held amongst people to educate themselves. But I think we may have done a lightweight version of that, as opposed to some of the issues that have been occurring. And so that might be another opportunity to do that kind of outside the evaluative process, and then you can be more specific about issues, much as we've done, the visioning part and what things we wanted to improve. We brought a list of issues that we wanted to improve. We could do the same here for board governance, and I think we've done that in the past. Some people have had concerns with the people who ran that program, and so we pushed it off. But maybe we should bring that type of program back again. And I think clearly if the president is suggesting there are problems, then there is action we can take outside of these type of processes.
Looking for any other comments or points of discussion?
I think the surveys that we used at the end of the meetings were good, but I think they could be improved on to maybe reflect some of the points in this monitoring document more clearly.
Yeah, I found the surveys not super useful, actually, because of the data we got back wasn't highlighting things like this at all.
Okay, so without being repetitive in any way or trying not to be, obviously next week we'll review language and protocols concerning this, and it'd be a good time to maybe delve into how we could improve on this as we look through that process now. And so now let's focus in on, unless there's any other discussion, on the current motion, which is in full compliance or not in compliance with 1002.7. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of finding the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002.7 indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Nay. Any abstention? Okay. The board finds that it is in full compliance with 1002.7.
What was the vote? Did I hear a nay?
There was one nay, so it was 4-1. So we move on to point 8, Director Drinkwater.
The board, by majority vote, may revise or amend its policies at any time. However, normally a proposed policy revision will be discussed at one session of the board prior to being approved at a subsequent board meeting. In emergency circumstances, the board may approve a policy change without delay upon an affirmative vote of 4 members. I move we're in compliance.
Second.
Okay. The motion is to find the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002.8. Discussion, comments.
I'd say we changed the policy around this this review without notifying anybody. So that's probably not in compliance.
Could you explain that further? How was the policy changed?
I think it's been discussed. I don't want to be repetitive.
Okay.
I don't understand your comment.
I'm going to echo that too, so go ahead and be repetitive on this. If that's okay, because I didn't get it.
Oh, well, sorry. I think as we discussed, the board policy to discuss violations or issues around these policies was to talk to the members up front and then provide opportunity for corrective action. And then we wouldn't all be in the dark in this, was one. Number two, if there's concerns about board education and board norms, we should be having a retreat and discuss that. And these type of things can be brought up at any time. They should be brought up when they occur first, so that we have a common platform that gets us to wanting that retreat. So I'd say that's usually the way it works, but
I
sorry,
hear what you're saying. That is repeating
I'm sorry,
what you said before.
Director
but
D'Souza, if you'll hold for just a
Yeah.
moment. Are you finished with your comment? I want to make sure you have your
Oh, sorry.
full time.
so it doesn't matter. I'll let Tracy go. Yep.
I was just going to say, I think what you're saying is irrelevant to this particular note, because we didn't change a policy. While we may not have fulfilled an expectation, I don't think it's what you're saying is related to this particular item. At least I can't see the connection.
I was going to make the same comment. But whether or not we're following a policy versus changing it are different. Thanks.
It's okay to rebut. Unless it's stating the same comment. But yeah, if you feel you can clarify more, please do.
No point.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion? Seeing none. Okay. So the motion on the floor is to find the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002.8. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Anyone abstaining? No. So point 8 passes unanimously. Excellent. Whew, that was a process. So now we come down to the full policy, and we have very slowly and deliberately gone through point by point on this, finding us in full compliance by majority of the quorum in every point. So we can accept that as full compliance, I think, of the overarching document, or we can also take a motion to full compliance of the entire document. Actually, if I'm looking down here, the motion would be in full compliance, in compliance with noted exceptions, not in compliance, and any date for remonitoring if necessary. And I'm not sure, when is the next time we monitor this particular thing? If I go to governing style, March of 2016, 17, 18. So it's annual.
Yeah, it'll be next March.
So the motion could be in full compliance or in full compliance with noted exceptions, or not in compliance. And then you can do any of those combinations with a date for remonitoring if necessary, if we want to vote to maybe remonitor it sooner. And that can be done in conjunction or separately, I think. Yeah. I think the initial thing right now is the board in full compliance or in compliance with noted exceptions.
I move that we find the board in full compliance. I'll give my reason.
I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion right now and the second is to find the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002 governing style. Any discussion?
I know there's some concerns, and there were some nays and abstentions. However, each of the subsections passed, we found in full compliance by majority vote. I think it's appropriate to find in full compliance. If we had had one section not be found in compliance, I think that would be proper to find in compliance with noted exceptions. But we speak as a whole, and our votes were full compliance.
I agree. I also think remonitoring before doing language update and or getting consistent norms around this would be premature. So I'd also suggest I'd be against remonitoring prematurely.
Stay quiet.
So speaking on behalf as an individual board member, contributor to the board, in finding full compliance, while in certain points I really battled with this, I want to say I appreciate the deliberate process with which we've just kind of tackled these point by point. It was uncomfortable in moments. It took a lot for us to really delve into this, I think, in certain areas. And for me personally, that feels like that's transparency. That's doing the work, especially when we're monitoring ourselves, being vulnerable, especially in an archived meeting, of sharing our voice and our opinions, and challenging ourselves. And so I feel comfortable stepping out of this with the decision how we find this with confidence. And as we move into monitoring language and all that, we'll continue to grow and build and learn as a board, which is a positive thing because we're a learning institution.
Well said.
Any other comments? Seeing none. The motion is to find the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1002 governing style. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Say nay. Any abstentions? All right. It's unanimous. We are voted in full compliance. Okay. At this point in the agenda, because we're coming up to 7 o'clock when we have our scheduled candidates forum, I don't see any candidates here, but I do know that there's some food in the back because we started earlier. So I would like to make a motion that we take a 15-minute recess and reconvene at 7 o'clock to move into the potential candidates forum, and then beyond that, return to our regular agenda.
One quick check would be if any staff members need to be present for any of these upcoming items and they have opportunity to, I guess, maybe not leave early. Is that a possibility to do? I don't know if we have anybody who could leave early who needs to present. No? Okay, then that's fine.
So I have a motion to take a 15-minute recess. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. I don't want to force a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, take a recess, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Say nay. Any abstentions? No. Okay, so we are in recess until 7 o'clock. Thank you.
for them.
They're not here.
We'll wait for them.
They'll
We'll be
know.
there till 10 o'clock.
We'll
They
be
haven't
there.
shown up yet.
No, they're like, when are you doing this? So I told them, and they're like,
Yeah.
That's the only one I know of. I
Yeah.
think there's
Yeah.
said anything they're going to go.
Maybe they're all watching on TV.
But then they don't get material.
It is on board docs, though, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
materials are,
So
but
people
Kendall,
can see it.
but Kendall brought extras if they were
Oh,
taking
okay.
theirs, so they can take it with them to study and pour over and.
Yeah, people would be watching the meetings, would be seated here
Yeah, it's a nice opportunity for people if they're interested. It's a
Yeah.
great opportunity.
to sit in and listen to it happen beforehand.
I think it makes a difference.
Yeah,
I mean, the televised is a nice addition, but I think there's something said to be in the room.
especially if you intend to be a board member.
It's a good practice. Yeah.
Well, you just get to feel, oh gosh, it's warm in here now, right? It's cold, now it's warm.
So you haven't had pie today?
Did they bring pie?
No, you haven't had. It just said you haven't
not
had pie today.
Sydney and I talked about it today, that we'll just have to have pie at 3:14 someday in
Oh.
the future.
Very nice.
And it's going to be a few days. She's going to her dad's tomorrow. Steve's out of town, but my daughters are sick. I've had to wait. And I'm going out of town tomorrow to meet Steve up in Vancouver to go to Whistler, so
Oh, cool.
things are
Is he working?
And I'm getting, he's, huh?
Is he working in Vancouver?
Well, he's just visiting an office.
Oh.
Amazon office. He took the train this morning. And
Oh,
his
really?
cab didn't show up, so I had to drive him to the train station. It's just been-
Has he taken the train before, or was this kind of an experiment?
No, this is
Kind of an adventure?
he's taken the bus before, the Greyhound. And now there's this new Bolt bus. We're
Yeah.
looking into that. But then he decided to take the train, and he was like, this is wonderful. This is so relaxing. And I'm like, behind on everything, so I had to take I'm like, smile. Good for you.
Although it's always it's risky this time of year taking the train because Well, they'll be up on the screen, right?
Okay. Do we have recorders ready to go? And are we?
Oh, we never even did this one.
I didn't check in on the recorder ahead.
No.
Uh-oh.
Save someone for a long. Ready to go.
All right. So it is 7:02. We're back in session from recess, and we're going to move forward in our agenda, if it is all right with the board, to section 7A, which is a candidate informational session. This is an informational session for potential school board candidates. So we have a couple of audience members with us here. If you are a potential candidate and would like to join us to create a forum for discussion back and forth, please come down to the table and take a microphone.
I'm also here on behalf of people who couldn't make the meeting, and I'm going to take notes and pass them on. That was a request.
Excellent. So we'll make sure your mic is on, and I'll have you repeat that into the microphone.
I was going to say, I know a number of people who are interested in running for school board but can't be here, so I volunteered to come and take notes and share the information.
Please make sure that they know that all of these documents are available on the agenda as well.
Great, okay.
So to start with, you want to start with introductions?
School board member David D'Souza. This is position 1. It's my 4th year, and my position is up for election.
I'm Tracy Drinkwater, school board member, position number 3, and mine is also up for re-election, and I'm not running again.
Ralph Jorgensen, hello. I think my number is number 5, and it's up for election in November, and I am not running.
Are you a potential candidate? Are you here for the forum?
Yeah.
Please come forward.
I'm just exploring.
Yeah, so so am I.
Yeah. This is not a commitment at this time.
This way you can ask questions and use the microphone.
Ralph actually inspired me. We talked like 2 days ago.
Excellent.
And we won't ask you any questions,
Okay.
other than what's your name. I'm Deborah Lurie. I'm vice president of the board, and it's position 4. I have position 4. And I've been on the board for a year and 2 months.
Brian Giannini Upton, currently serving as president of the board. I'm with Vice President Lurie. I've been on the board for a year and a couple months. And then we have Director D'Souza and Director Drinkwater, who both share that their positions are up for election. Director Drinkwater is not running again. It's formal. We don't know yet with Director D'Souza and, Ralph and Brian.
Donna Kolaski, Superintendent. Welcome. And just so you know, staff over here, our Executive Director of Finance, Ty Bergstrom, our Assistant Superintendent, Learning Services, Fred Rendell, and Kendall Taylor, our Executive Assistant, taking notes and hiding behind the screen. So welcome. And again, just to point out, the documents we have are attached to the agenda, which is up on the screen as well. So if you want to reference them later, please feel free to take the copies that are there. But they're also, if you want to point anyone else, they're available there as well. One other document that is on the table, which isn't attached to the agenda, is our annual report, which you've probably seen before, but it kind of gives some basic information about the last year in the district. So feel free to take for yourself or friends.
And I think if you'd like to give just a quick 20 or 30-second introduction of who you are for the record and kind of your connection in the community or to the district, we'd welcome that. But there's no need for a ton of information. We'd love to know who you are.
I'm Robin Lee, and
If we have candidates for the forum, please come on down.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. And we've just introduced ourselves, so quickly, do you want to
David D'Souza, School Board Position 1. My position is up for re-election.
Tracy Drinkwater, School Board Member, Position 3, and my position's up for re-election, and I'm not running again.
Ralph Jorgensen, position number 5. My position is up in November, and I'm not running again.
Deborah Lurie, position 4, and my position is not up for re-election.
Brian Giannini Upton, position 2, serving as president this year, and my position is not up for re-election.
Donna Kolaski, Superintendent, and Staff, Executive Director Ty Bergstrom, Assistant Sup Fred Rundle, and Executive Assistant Kendall Taylor, all here for support as well. The documents in front of you are also available on our agenda.
So we were just going to take a moment for our folks here for the forum just to give a quick introduction of who you are and kind of your connection in the community or the district, however you like to do that, just 20 or 30 seconds.
Sure. My name is Lindy Tardif. I've lived here on the island for about 5.5 years. I have 3 kids. One's a freshman at the high school and 2 that are in the elementary school. So obviously my interest is because I have young kids. So yeah, thanks.
My name is Robin Lee, and I have a 4th grader at West Mercer and a upcoming rising kindergartner who will be starting at West Mercer in the fall. And I've been involved in the PTA and then have been able to be on what used to be the Diversity Advisory Council is now the Superintendent's Equity Advisory Council, and I had a little window into how the district works, and yeah, and just I think it's really important work in our community. We are a community that schools are at the center.
Great. Hi, thanks for hosting us, by the way. And nice meeting you guys. My name is John Rivera Dirks, and I know David and Ralph pretty well. I have a 1st grader, and I have a preschooler who's going to be starting kindergarten here pretty soon. So my kids are really young, and I'm very interested in actually sort of, learning more about the District Plan 2020, and then how, we look at the next 12 years out, because my kids will be in for the next 12 years. I've spent most of my career in education technology, starting at Apple and Microsoft and now at Amazon, so ed tech is really interesting to me. And then I'm also, I'm actually really interested in how we can do more for the youth, family services, and the counselors in the schools, because to me that's a critical issue. So I'm interested, in how a position like this can impact ed technology, mental health services, and counselors in the schools, and also what we can do for long-term planning.
So just kind of a setup to the evening. So this is a forum. There is no commitment at this time. But thank you for stepping forward and presenting here. This is a public meeting. It is archived and recorded, so be aware. And we are live right now, so it's good to keep that in mind. We have a few things here. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we'll kind of go through. The directors will kind of go slide by slide and give you an overview. We'll give you an opportunity to ask questions of us, and hopefully we'll give you a sense of what it's like to serve on the school board, the commitments that surround that, and we'll try to keep the scope of our comments and everything into the realm of the work of the school board and that process. Kind of. Cool. So. Slide deck? Sure. Does everyone want to start with the slide deck? Good. Mercer Island School District Board of Directors, running for and serving on the board, information session 2019. So it's a great time to consider board service. The district is healthy, thriving, and on a great growth trajectory. Opportunity to implement the district's updated vision and mission statements based on an update of the core beliefs and values. That work has been ongoing for over the last year. And we're in the process now of a roadshow of the new draft mission, vision and value statements that are going out to stakeholders and focus groups. And that's kind of, work will hopefully be done, or is kind of planned to be done before the start of the next school year, the 2019-20 school year. Currently is the plan, but it's not done until the board adopts officially the new language. So depending on the feedback from stakeholder groups, it could take longer. We have an outstanding leadership team in place. You have the opportunity to oversee the development of long-range facilities plan for the district. Another piece of work that the board is currently engaging in is a long-term facilities plan of looking at all the different facilities in the district and kind of queuing them up as to which needs to be repaired first or replaced first, and what that might look like. It doesn't necessarily tie right now to a financial bond or anything like that, but just getting a core sense of where we are. And currently, that process, we have a request for proposals out right now, and we'll be seeing those candidates come in, and the board will be selecting which group might be leading the community through that deliberation. And then there's an opportunity to plan for the next phase of growth in building capacity beyond 2020, and that's complete middle school and elementary schools. Do you want to go this way this time? Director Laurie, you want to take the next slide?
So we often get asked, what does the school board do? And it's not directing what happens in our schools. We have a policy, we have fundamentals and it is our duty to monitor the policies and through our fundamentals in order to make sure that we're on track and in compliance with that. We do that work with our superintendent, and we have an excellent relationship there that's really productive. Board members, our current board is very productive. We have great working relationships, able to have good dialogue and challenge each other and coming to consensus once that happens. We really focus on, even if we, disagree while coming to a decision, once a decision's made, it's the voice of the board and not individual members. Being on the board, it's a positive role to play in the community. At least currently, we seem to be well respected by the stakeholders, and we're all committed to make sure that the board is seen in a good light and making positive decisions for our students.
Pardon me, what's MIEA?
The Mercer Island Education Association, so the Teachers Association.
The MIEA represents both of our employee associations, our certificated, which is our teachers bargaining unit, and our classified employees, which includes the majority of the other employees. So secretaries, bus drivers, custodians are all encompassed in the Mercer Island Education Association.
All right, so what is policy governance? That is kind of the method in which we kind of self-rule ourselves as a board. I don't know what's the alternative called. Anybody know?
There are variations of policy governance.
Okay, and there's some that just don't do it, and I think it's and there's like 50% of the school districts, perhaps. There's a break. We have a policy governance. I think it's been explained to me, at least, that we kind of set the boundaries, the long-term goals. We want to win the game by X number of touchdowns, but we've got a coach over there that has worked in education for 30 years. How many years?
This is 34.
34 years. And she has the expertise, and we're not going to basically micromanage her. We're going to set what the goals are. Our goals we call fundamentals, and we have 7 of them, and that's what we review every year to find the district and the superintendent in compliance of meeting and thriving towards those goals. And so towards that end, we stay out of the operations, and we focus on the larger issues, the long-term issues, and that it's a boundary thing, and we always kind of have to watch ourselves a little bit because we get emails from people who are like, you name it, I didn't like that food item on the menu. We're not here to choose the food items on the menu. So We have an organization that does that. That's about it.
If may I add just one little piece on top of that?
Of course.
So if you, anytime you go to our district website and you go to the Board of Directors tab and drop down, if you go down to where it says agendas and meetings, it takes you into a program called Board Docs, which is our public database. You see our agenda here that you would see. And this is our public database of all of our policies and everything that we monitor throughout the year, including our schedule of how we monitor, and that's part of that policy governance protocol. And so they pulled up policies you see there, and there's the 1,000 series and 2,000 series. And so 1,000 is Board of Directors. Those are all the policies that we monitor throughout the year at different levels. 2000s go into instruction. That's where you find 2020, which is the mission and vision and values. And then all the way down to our 6,000 series of management and support. And so these are the policies and the work through policy governance that we as a board and the governance team review on a regular basis and find the superintendent in compliance or out of compliance, or the board, we find ourselves in compliance or out of compliance. And that's basically how we move through all of the work that needs to be done in the district of that long-term strategic planning up in the hot air balloon. And then we're continually monitoring the language of that and adjusting it and fine-tuning and adding policies and removing policies. And so that really is kind of the work of governance, policy governance, and that's really where we as a board predominantly live, is in those areas. So.
Sorry, maybe, pardon me, maybe it's just me, but I'm kind of like really struggling to sort
Can
of
we have you use the microphone, please?
Yes, yeah. I'm kind of struggling to sort of understand what your overall sort of mission is, and perhaps that's what's outlined in the 2020 doc, but I think it would really be helpful for someone like me who's a complete outsider and is sort of relatively newish to all of this to just kind of like break it down for me from a very high level perspective as to what's your mandate, and yeah, how does that really differ from kind of what gets done from an operational standpoint?
I think that's covered in the next slide, a lot of it. And Tracy, would you mind leading that? Thank you.
And this is, again, high level, but maybe as I go through these, we could click over to the website as well. So our policy governance tools, and Brian alluded to some of these, the 2020 vision and fundamentals. And the word ends is there. That's an older term we used to use, and I think maybe as part of policy governance, but if you just think of goals of the district, then so we have on our website and also in the board docs that they showed a page that talks about our vision, mission, our values, and then the 7 fundamentals. And those are those overarching statements that had been developed that we sort of govern by. And we also alluded to revisiting our vision and mission and values, and that is a process that we've been going through in some study sessions to take a look at what was developed over a decade ago and decide, is this appropriate for today? Because we should be always updating that. And of course, things have been edited along the way. We added a fundamental a few years ago, but this is an opportunity for our current board to really start almost from scratch, but take a look at what we have. We've looked at other districts, and we came up with a draft version that we're currently showing to various stakeholder groups and getting their feedback. And there'll be opportunities for the community to give input as well before that would be more finalized and replace what we have here, thank you, on the website. So those are the ones that we use now. The fundamentals are about various aspects of instruction and they reflect our values. And we use those to evaluate the district. And so there's documents that are in those links that show the times that we have monitored those. So this is a huge part of the job is listening to the reports that come at these meetings from staff about how the district is showing that they are achieving the goals. And then we decide whether the district is in compliance, which is whether the superintendent is in compliance, because she is our one employee that we evaluate. We also have times of the year that we evaluate her performance as well. So, and then the next, so hopefully that answers a lot of your questions, but by looking at it online, you'll get a lot more questions answered. And then the operational expectations, if we look at the next item in the slide deck that I think you have in front of you, operational expectations we also call OEs, and those are part of the 1000 series that they showed on there. And those are some of the kind of, well, they're expectations, right? Of the operations of the district that don't quite fit into fundamentals and around instruction and how things happen with the kids, but more about how things happen with staff and the finances and assets and insurance, and communication and support to the board is huge. Whenever something happens in the district, we get a notification from our superintendent about what's happening that's important so that we're aware. Whether or not we were to make a decision on it is irrelevant. It's just that we should know what's happening in our district. And that's something we then evaluate her on. Is she telling us about things? And she does a great job at that. So that, along with our relationship and the whole governance process, the reason why the sub-bullet says created, fine-tune, and monitor is because at some point in time these things were created, and we may create new ones in the future. We actually monitor them and then we fine-tune them. So every year we monitor each one of these, or so. We could monitor something early. We could then, after we've monitored something, have an opportunity for language review, we call it, and that's the fine-tuning, where we say, we just evaluated this, but I felt like something was missing or some wording was not really appropriate anymore, or we need something new, and so we might edit it. And that is another board process. It's updating our policies on a regular basis. Okay?
Next one, a few policy governance rules of the road. So as has been stated, we work on a policy governance level. So we don't direct day-to-day activities. We work at a very high level. So these are the goals. So we're a group of 5 people, and the board works on things that are in a calendar. So we at the beginning of the year, we have a calendar that decides what fundamentals we're reviewing, what operational expectations we're reviewing, and we work on that calendar. Then the board can add specific items to the calendar. For example, mental health counselors. We could add that as a discussion item to the calendar and talk about that. And so the board only meets twice a month on Thursdays. And so there's a very limited number of things we can do and we can add to the calendar. And when we do something, we vote on an action, a decision that the board makes, and that's the 5 people who make a vote. 3 out of 5 would make that as a direction. Once that's a direction we've decided on as a board, we now speak to that direction with one voice. And so everybody buys into that as a board, and we move forward. So limited number of things we can work on. When we decide something, we deliberate, debate, and speak with one voice. Another key piece of the board is we have only one employee. About a year ago, we hired a superintendent. So that's a key piece of the board's work, is to hire a superintendent and then review him or her. And that's the only employee we work through. So no, we really can't direct any other staff member in the school. So, and the level at which we work with the superintendent, again, is at a goal-oriented and policy-oriented level. So the goal is to not micromanage and work on a day-to-day basis, but specify the goals. So that really leads to the next one, which is the board directs the what, but not the how it's done. We leave that to the educational experts. And then finally, the board is not involved in any personnel decisions. We don't hire, fire, review anybody else in the district except for the superintendent. And the fundamentals, the operational expectations, were very clear up front on the rules by which we will evaluate the superintendent. That's the fundamentals. That's the operational expectations. And throughout the year, we will review the superintendent in compliance or not. And that's our scope. So, and much of this is driven actually by state law, not necessarily by policy. So you are very clear up front how you manage and review your superintendent, and you don't change the goalposts out from under them, except in a board meeting where, again, 3 out of 5 people decide what the new goalposts are and move forward. And then finally, little repetitive, everything that comes before the board is either a matter of policy or a function of law. So that's the level we work at. We're not picking the colors of the schools. We're not necessarily picking the curriculum. We will review and give our guidance around that and a final approval. But there's a lot of things here that are policy, very different than advocacy, very different than working in a PTA and doing very specific things or volunteering in a school. You kind of have to like working at a high level and getting the best out of really great people. And the best way to get the best out of great people is not to tell them what to do.
Which is, so the compliance piece in terms of figuring out...
Can you use the microphone? Thank you.
If the board's in compliance or the superintendent's in compliance, does that happen once a year, or you said a couple times a year, or is it...
It actually happens ongoing. So in our calendar, you will see each of the fundamentals. They're up for review at different times. Every month or so, we'll review a different fundamental. And so we find the superintendent in compliance of that fundamental at that time. And then at the end of the year, twice a year, we do a summative evaluation of the superintendent, which is kind of rolling up everything that happened prior into one review, and then providing that to the superintendent. So it's pretty deterministic. You know where you sit all along the way. There's no end of the year sudden surprise of what's happening. So, and that's required by law, that setup is there. When we evaluate the superintendent, there's one point where we decide salary, and the board decides that. There's another point where the board can roll forward the superintendent's contract or not. So that's kind of the hire fire case, and that's evaluated each year. Yeah, actually, they had the calendar up there a second ago that you can see where we review things and all that. And you can get this at board docs, as Brian stated.
In board docs, it's buried under the 1000 series, and it's specifically called out. But you can also get to that on the very front page of board docs. There, you can see on the side under policies. It has a little cue, so you can pretty easily get to that policy. And so you can see in that, or over here, that annual calendar is broken down. Our year begins, this calendar begins in September. And then you can see, as we go through, we meet regularly twice a month on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of every month. If school's in session, that changes based around certain school holidays. Traditionally, July is a month where we don't typically have a lot of meetings. So it'll note on the far left the 2 dates in that month. We have the meetings, and then it breaks down in each category of what's being monitored. So you see the big ones. Fundamentals are in there. You see global executive constraint and emergency, superintendent succession, and so all those things are mapped up. So we as a board can look at that, or any member of the public can look at that calendar and know when we're going to be discussing that next topic next, and then you can use that calendar to go into all of our policies and figure out exactly what's said in that policy and how it functions. And it can go from a operational expectation or board policy that's a really simple paragraph of a couple sentences to a fundamental review, which may be a 60-page review. So it really varies depending on what it is.
Could you say something about the, because I saw there's different kinds of meetings, like study session, or could you explain the different kinds of meetings and I guess the interaction with the public at those different meetings that may or may not happen?
Do you mind if I take it? Okay. There are different types of meetings. So this is a regular meeting of the Board of Directors that happens twice a month, and we do that regularly. The public can expect to find us right here on the second and fourth Thursday of the month, so long as school is in session, typically. And then there are special meetings or study sessions. That's outside of our regular meeting schedule. They're notified in advance, and there are public meeting laws that we have to adhere to as elected representatives, elected board. So those study sessions can be the equivalent of a retreat that we do twice a year, or we do a linkage session with a community group, or we're delving into a new subject. We're looking at strategic planning and all that, so we do these special sessions.
What's a linkage session?
A linkage session would be one in a community group where we sit around a table with the community group, and it's a discussion. It's an actual discussion. Unlike a regular meeting of the board, and this is special here that we're having a discussion. Typically, a regular meeting of the board is a meeting of the board and the governance team in public. It's not a discussion with the public. While we certainly, as a board and as a government agency, provide for public input, we take the input from the public, but we don't respond to it or answer it, and the superintendent may respond at a later time. So it's important to know that a regular meeting is a meeting of the board in the public and recorded for the public, but not necessarily a dialogue, whereas a linkage session is a dialogue or a hearing, where we'll do a hearing on the budgeting or something, and that's where the public comes in and is able to ask questions and pertaining to data.
Yeah, add a little to it. Like linkage session, we have 2 linkage sessions a year with the city council, one in the spring and one in the fall. We also have one with Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce. We also have one with Mercer Island Education Association. We also usually have one with the community taxpayers. I think at least scheduled once a year. Any others?
The legislature, did you mention?
Yeah. And then beyond that, the law provides for certain exempt or executive sessions. The only time the board is really legally allowed to meet and discuss business and specific business of the board outside of the view of the public is when it pertains to a student record or employment, I believe, or areas of emergency. It's really specific. Appeal hearings.
Real estate.
Purchase of
real estate. So the law provides for very specific and narrow areas where the board can meet privately out of the view of the public. And for that, no more than 2 members of the board can have a discussion about any business of the district without advance notice to the public and without the opportunity for them to view it. So anytime 3 or more board members get together, you've established quorum, and you are now being held to public meeting laws. And those have been public meeting laws have come around for a long time. They're called sunshine laws, where it believes that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and so it is best that we conduct the majority of our business in the full view and transparency of the public who we serve. Yeah, and there's training and onboarding. The first few months of being a board director is a bit like drinking out of a fire hose, but there's a lot of great training on all of these laws and programs to gain certificates so that you understand public documents and public meetings. The public documents is another thing. Any document that we produce involving the business of the district is a public document. It can include emails and messages and notes and stuff pertaining to that. So it's important to know that what you do officially on behalf of the board is very official in the eye of the public. And then the few lessons that we've learned, this is not exhaustive, but important. If you're passionate about changing a school program or something that is the responsibility of the superintendent or a principal, becoming a board member is not your best avenue. You'll be both frustrated and largely ineffective. So what that means is we're all advocates. That's how we arrived at this desk. And there's the advocate hat that we grow accustomed to. Once you enter the board, suddenly it becomes much more restrictive of how you can interact with the 5 and how you can monitor policy. And again, our goal under our overarching policies here in this district is that we are not in the work of the superintendent, but we surround the superintendent and administrative staff in allowing them to do their work. And occasionally stand shoulder to shoulder to protect the superintendent and the district and staff in times of great controversy or whatever, to allow the superintendent to deal with what's happening operationally while we take the public heat or whatever to address. If you have kids in the schools, you have to be able to wear your parent hat in some situations and your board member hats in others. So when I enter into a school, I have my badge that I wear, and it says board member, and I wear that personally just so that everyone around me is kind of aware there's a board member walking through, but I don't make comments, I'm not taking notes, I'm not observing how the principal's working or teachers, and I don't comment on that. I'm in the school as a volunteer, as a parent, and that's who I am there. And if it comes to something for me personally, a constituent or a parent approaches me in the parking lot and wants to talk about business, I'll say, I'm here as a volunteer today. I can help guide you to who is the appropriate person in the district to talk to, but we want to follow mutual respect and responsibilities, go through the proper chain of command before anything comes up to the board. And part of that is if there's an issue at a lower level that ends up escalating through the appeals process to a hearing of the board, we as individuals want to find details of that investigation or whatever is going on at the time of that hearing. And if we know too much about one side of it too early on, we may have to recuse ourselves from that discussion or whatever, because it could end up being a conflict of interest. So it's just always good to know who you are at which point in the community.
Yeah, what kind of issues tend to sort of percolate all the way up for hearing in front of the board?
It could be
our policies outline the process, an example being a complaint process, and so they go through several levels, starting at the lowest level and working their way through the site level, the district office level, superintendent can be a level on that. There are some within that process that then allow the appeal to the board. Generally, that's going to be a student discipline concern or a personnel matter, or the general concerns with that.
David?
I'd say it's rare for something like to be escalated to the board in that fashion. Usually we get public input from the board. They'll stand at the podium and give us input. They'll give us email. We will request input in terms of the surveys we send out on a regular basis. And then all that gets evaluated as part of the fundamentals and part of the ongoing work of the board. That's usually the best way that things happen. And then policy gets changed and adjusted to make our district better.
And then, as we talked about, there's that the voice of the board. If the board has made a decision or has made a public statement, an official statement, and somebody asks you about that, you would speak with what you know the voice of the board is, and address that in that way as representative. But we are also representatives and ambassadors of the board to the public, as well as representing the public. So if a constituent ever comes up and has a question of where do I find this policy, or what is the process for here, or whatever, we can absolutely answer that and in any way help a constituent or a community member find where all this information is. Because we figured out where it all is, and it's a process. And so, yeah, part of our job is that community outreach and engagement to help people have a better understanding of the work of the board and the district as a whole.
And I think that's actually pretty key is, while we can reach out to the community and get feedback from the community, as I had stated earlier, there's a limited number of things we can really take on as a board that fit on with the calendar. So that's why it's easier to talk to the principals and talk to the teacher, talk to the principal, talk to the superintendent. Much more actionable, much quicker, because anything you want the board to do, we would have to do it as a group of 5, discuss, deliberate, and then vote. And that takes time to and then change policy, not your specific individual concern.
And one part of it is a goal of the board is not to be reactionary, but forward-thinking. And so there may be an incident that happens in the community or a national incident or something where it happened early on when we joined the board. There was a national incident. And outside of my family, close family, the 4 people, one person I could talk to pretty immediately. The other 4 people that I wanted to talk to in that moment, I couldn't. And I had to wait 10 days almost before I could have that conversation with these individuals to see what do we think and how does this reflect in our values. And that, for me, was really frustrating in that first instant of understanding the people I want to create change with, I can't legally speak to in this moment. Whereas when the days I was an advocate, I was on that phone rallying people and building that coalition to move forward. So the work we do is very slow and very deliberate, and that's by design, typically. Sometimes, if the board has the will and the timing's right, we can be quite agile. So other information from the board or questions from our potential candidates?
I was just going to ask a general question. What do you like most about being on the board and least about being on the board?
Vice President Lurie.
Least politics and campaigning. It has nothing to do with what we do on the board. And what I like most is hearing from our administration, from our principals who come and report. When we do school visits, which we do a couple times a year, we hear from our teachers and see our students in classrooms in action. We monitor the fundamentals, and the principals come and present on the different topics of them. At our next meeting, if you look at the calendar, we're monitoring Fundamental 7, so diversity and equity and inclusion. So the principals will come and have some statistics on different data points and examples of things that they're doing in their schools and things that are happening as relating to that fundamental. So that's where, we don't do that. We get to hear what's happening in our schools and make sure that that's in line with what we've set as our priorities.
I guess what I like most about this position is, thank you. I think it kind of ties to my favorite meeting of the month. I'm a board member that is responsible for going to the PTA council meeting. And at that council meeting is the president of each of the PTAs. Often the MIEA representative, our superintendent, somebody from MIYFS counseling. Who am I forgetting? Communications coordinator. It's fascinating to see, and it's also tied to, education is the jewel, I think, of this island. I mean, that's why a number of people are here. And you have 4,200 students, 4,400 students, probably 6,000 plus parents. So many people that might not have students in the district, but value the school district. And I think we're exceptionally lucky to have a community that really values education. 400 plus teachers and staff, and thousands of volunteers. It's a fantastic community of people, and you go to the PTA council meeting and you see advocacy is looking at it through a different lens. The teachers union representative is looking at a different lens. Everybody's got a different lens, but at that meeting, it's interesting to. It's very productive because everybody kind of appreciates their point of view. And I don't think that's necessarily the case for all school districts that have a PTA council like that. So it's just neat to see a community of 10,000 plus people just hopefully rowing in the same direction.
I'll be much shorter. My favorite part is reflective of a lot of what they're saying. Just having this great view of all the fantastic work that happens in the district. And that happens both in the meetings and outside the meetings. We go on site visits to the different schools. My least favorite is budget cuts. when things are going really well in the school district with something and then we have to make cuts. It's the worst feeling that you couldn't save something.
I think it was a new opportunity for me to learn about education. I come from an engineering background. Education I've got kids in the school. It was a great opportunity to see how this sausage is made. It's pretty complicated. I've learned a great deal from it, read a lot outside in books and that type of thing too about it. So if you're really interested in a new field and want to learn something new, I think that's wonderful. It's at a very high level, so you're at a level where you're learning from experts and great people. And that's also interesting to me because you immediately get the get to learn from somebody with 30 plus years of experience, as you know, as opposed to winging it. And so I think that's been great. You know, what's tough, what can be very, very frustrating is actually the number of things you really cannot action. You'd like to be able to say, oh, we could just do this, or, you know, if you've got a favorite passion, I'm all about computer science, and we should just do this, and have computer science everywhere. Well, it's not that easy on the from the side of the table to do it. And at the same time, I can talk to volunteers who are off there teaching computer science every day and not on the board. So I think there are those frustrations about things you really cannot be effective at doing, and it's painful.
For me, first I'll say I've gotten to know the governance team here in central administration and our superintendent at a relatively close level, I would say, and we've built a great rapport. But there's just a team of amazing people in this school district working for our kids every day. So it's an honor, a privilege to work and volunteer alongside them. Also the fact that, you know, I come at this from advocacy for children. So the thought that we set up here as a governance team and we are really looking at the overarching policy that can really impact the lives of children. And that's powerful for me. So now I'm going to be emotional. But the most frustrating part for me is those moments where the best thing that I can do is to keep my mouth shut and sit back, you know, bite my tongue and let things play out the way they need to play out in that slow, deliberate manner, even though I have specific information and knowledge and opinions around that I would love to blast into the community. Sometimes the best thing you can do and most productive thing you can do is allow it to play out without getting involved. And as an advocate, that's sometimes incredibly difficult and frustrating. So I would say the positives for me far outweigh the negatives. Yeah. That's an excellent question. Any other questions, points of clarification?
So one thing that does come up is how much time does it take to be a board member? And, you know, so we meet twice a month, and then there might be two times a month on Thursday are these bigger meetings. And then there might be other meetings that come up, whether they're talking about mission, vision, values, whether they're talking about facilities. We might create special meetings or study sessions for that. There might be site visits, visiting any of the schools that are special meetings. Anything that pops up, like such as reviewing the superintendent is a private meeting that's done, and then we do the public review. So there's a bunch of those things that come up. And then finally, to prepare for each of these meetings also takes time. You really cannot go into these meetings cold. It takes a great deal of time to do the preparation. So easily it can be anywhere from, you know, per 2-week period, you could easily spend 10 hours between the meeting and preparation in that 2-week period. Would be my goal. I think if you're in different roles, if you're a president or you've got other, a longer stream going on, such as superintendent search or mission and vision, or facilities management, these things kind of pop up, then it might actually be longer than that.
I think it's important to mention that this board also, at their reorganization at the beginning of each year, each takes on a role with each of the schools for their PACs, and as Ralph mentioned, the PTA council, so that there's board reps on the different superintendent advisories as well as the site advisories as well. And so they attend those meetings also, which are varied, but could add another meeting to your monthly calendar. At least one.
I work full-time outside this. Some do, some don't, and everyone has other responsibilities. When people ask me, I typically say 15 to 20 hours a month, and it all could kind of be lumped in a couple days. So there can be a couple crazy days, but then you'll have a week or a week and a half go by where there's nothing. And it's very manageable. I find working full-time, I'm able to take the days off where we've got things that we need to be doing during the day, but there does need to be that availability. It's not a ton, but we do 3 site visits a year, and there's a couple board retreats. So as long as there's that limited flexibility, it's very manageable.
And then on top of that, depending on your level of availability and interest, when you're elected as a school board director, you're automatically enrolled in the Washington State School Directors Association, which is the overarching association for the 1,100 elected officials in Washington State serving on school boards. Each school board in the state has 5 representatives outside of Seattle, which is 7. So we are the largest body of elected officials in Washington State and the largest body of elected officials in the United States. So when school board directors combine forces, it's very powerful. You're not required to move at that level, but we do filter up from our local unit into a district area or a director area. Ours is about 20 different school districts combined throughout King County, which enrolls into a state level, and then that can even roll up to the National School Boards Association. So depending on how engaged you are and how much you want to drive that, as you move up into those organizations, you're now representing regions and states, and so you slowly begin to become more of an advocate again, and then you return back here to put on your board hat here. So depending, but those are regional meetings that come up and regional publications that are sent, and there's always more work that can be done if you want to. And then there's always just a new piece of policy or something that's presented to your monitoring, which may go to 4 different WACs, the Washington amended code or whatever. And so each of those codes may then splinter off into 7 more codes, and then that takes you to a national. And so depending on how much time you have to go down the rabbit hole, I would say maybe towards a minimum of 10 hours, and who knows how much time it could take you. It depends on your style. Any other questions? We brought up the board candidate informational session sheet, and I think these are some of our frequently asked questions you have there. Some of those questions we've already answered. We could kind of just generally touch on those as we go down. Legal qualifications to become a board member is a resident of Mercer Island and a registered voter in the school district. And then there are other parameters in policy, local policy and state policy, as to whether you work with the school district and things that it would be best to look through King County government documents and all that as to how that goes out.
And isn't there the other sheet that has the links that WASDA has about what it is to be a school board director? Those are some really great documents in there that give you the more general view, or we've given you a lot of the Mercer Island view.
If you access it on our board docs, those links should be live and take you right to that information as well.
So just on timeline here, it's in May where you'd file, and then if there's more than 2 people for the position, so that would be if there were like 3 people, there'd be a primary in August. When heck, everyone's on vacation, by the way. And then the election's in November, and it seems like out of cycle with the regular election, so like turnout must be pretty low for I mean, how's
It
turnout?
is on off cycles, but there's also the city council positions up, so it's
Oh, I
it's
see.
big local election.
I see.
And this year we have 3 school board positions that are open and running, and whether or not people are running as an incumbent. And then the city council has actually 5. Normally they would have 4 of their 7, but there's a 5th one that was a replacement. So there's going to be a lot of signs and campaigning going on, and forums and things like that too. So it's not a big, it's not going to get as much turnout as the bigger elections, but
Got it.
there'll be a lot of activity on the island.
Okay.
So the requirement for an election to be certified, I believe, is 40% of the turnout that happened the previous election. So people come out to vote on Mercer Island. They're pretty good.
And also, you can link in on Facebook if you're into Facebook social media. King County has a Facebook page with their elections commission that has lots of great updates coming out about. They have their own candidate forums and how to file with the Public Disclosure Commission and when filing week is and how to do that and financial requirements. And those documents are all available to you as potential candidates. And we've all been there, and so you can tap any one of us on the side, and we can guide you or point you to where to find those documents and those tools. There's great WASDA resources in there. WASDA is not the end-all, be-all of how to be a school board candidate, but they do house the biggest collection library of our model policies that we follow, everything. But there are other ways to approach being a school board member beside the WASDA's links. Yeah.
I was just going to add, King County Elections is a wealth of information, and you can talk to them quite easily. I'm surprised at how easily you can reach some authorities there, and they're very helpful.
Also, how does it work in terms of choosing which of the positions to run for? Is it by location where you live, or you just choose?
You just choose.
You just choose.
And some people strategize, if there's an incumbent running, maybe they do or don't want it for various reasons, run against that person. It's just whoever files first for that one is in there, and then people start choosing another one or the same one, and it's kind of a random, weird process. And also, it's happened that people will then cancel their filing for that position and move over to another position based on whoever else signed up. So it's weird, but that's how it works, yeah.
So all the positions are at large. Seattle has district location based, and then 2 at large. We're all at large. You have to run for a specific position. You don't just run for school board and the top 3 vote getters get it in. You run for a specific position. And you could only run for 1 position. You couldn't put your name in 2 or anything like that. There's a start filing date where you file initially. Then there's an end filing date. It's about 1 week, and you can move around within that time frame, and you can even withdraw completely. But after that time frame, you're on the ballot based on how many people run in a position. If there's more than 2, you will have a runoff in August to find the top 2, which will then be in November. If you don't have a runoff, then you're just on the November ballot.
But to simply, notice that we can't always remember what position number we are. Once you've been elected, it doesn't matter at all. Everyone's 5. We don't even know.
And during that week, I think Monday through Friday or whatever that window is, I think King County Elections post at the end of that day kind of those positions and the people there. And then the next day, people may move. And then Friday, or where the last day is kind of blind, and then they just say, that's where it is. So it's a little bit of gamesmanship sometimes.
And for politicos, it's a big week for those of us who are in elected offices and those who follow that and track that. It's exciting when filing week opens, there's the big celebration, and when filing week closes, if you picture the Leonardo DiCaprio in The Great Gatsby with the glass of champagne, congratulations, you've made it through filing week. There's often celebrations and dinners and everything that kind of go around that. So it's a big event.
And do you need signatures or anything to get on? Do you need signatures or anything to get on the ballot?
You don't. You don't have to collect signatures for that. You file and you put it on there. There are certain, and King County elections will have the information of if you're going to have a campaign committee or whatever, there are specific requirements around that and filing with the IRS for an employment identification number. And I mean, there are lots of particulars if you're going to have a campaign committee or not, and how much money you plan to spend in a campaign triggers different things. And really, while we have some experience, the best place to ask those questions is King County elections and beyond. And we can certainly point you to those links and all of that. But yeah.
If you've ever run a campaign before, or been in a campaign, school bonds, city levies, that type of stuff, another good way to learn is to join one of those and be an advocate for those type of things.
Any remaining questions or points of clarification? Anything here? No? Well, I want to thank you, hopefully on behalf of the entire board, for being here tonight, showing your interest in being a potential candidate. Congratulations. And just for even being here and thinking about it, considering it, thank you for considering running for public office and serving. It's powerful to serve our community in these special ways, and it takes strong people to show up. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Feel free to take the materials, and if you want more than one set for your friends and
I'm gonna
neighbors,
take a couple for
feel free to take them as well. They are all available online on the agenda, and the annual report is available on our website.
We also have more of our meeting to go, and so you're welcome to stay and see how we do things, or watch one online, or come to any future meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you say you were with Amazon?
Okay, does anybody need a moment or a quick break, or are we good to pick back up and continue on? I see nods. Let's pick back up and continue on. All right. Thank you for your patience tonight. So we are turning back to Section 2, now B, Board Policy 1003, Board Job Descriptions. And again, description. All right, there we go. And this one has 7 points to it. Each one can be voted in full compliance or not in compliance. I'm happy to take it one at a time if you'd like. I would recommend that, as each one is specifically in compliance or not. And I'm happy to read the introduction, or if somebody else would like to kick it off, I'm okay with that too.
Actually, I'd like to propose that we do it all in one fell swoop, and if people don't agree, they can vote no to my proposal.
Okay.
But I move that we find the district in compliance for all items in Board Policy 1003.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to go through 1 through 7. So we'll say to find the board in full compliance of Board Policy 1003, points 1 through 7. Any discussion? A side note here, but I'm not calling up. So do you want to read through, just point by point, go all the way through so that we have on record for the public what we're doing?
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
I can read the whole thing, or is it,
If you want to just start with one, and we
Okay.
can just
And
round robin.
Number 1, ensure that the vision, mission, and fundamentals, or ends, as described in Board Policy 2020, are the focus of organizational performance.
Whoever would like to read 2.
Advocate. I thought we were. Sorry, I was
I
completely
moved ahead of
confused.
myself. So the motion on the floor is to do them all as
At
one
one
or
time.
individually. So I apologize.
So the motion on the floor is to do it all at one time.
Yes, and there was no discussion. I didn't see discussion, so that's what threw me. So is there any comment or discussion? No. Then all in favor of doing them all at once, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? No. Okay. Now, if you wouldn't mind, we've read one, if we'll move on to two. And
Advocate for the organization and the students it serves.
3, maintain constructive two-way dialogue with students, staff, parents, and the citizens as a means to link with the entire community, primarily around the board's 2020 policy.
Number 4, develop written governing policies that at the broadest levels address vision, mission, and fundamentals, ends, organizational impacts, benefits, and end results for students, what end result is desired and at what cost, operational expectations, constraints on executive authority that establish the practical, ethical, and legal boundaries within which all staff activity and decision-making will take place, governance process, how the board will conceive, carry out, and monitor its own work, and board-superintendent relationship, the extent of authority delegated to the superintendent, and the process for monitoring organizational and superintendent performance.
Number 5, ensure effective superintendent performance through monitoring board policy 2020 and operational expectation policies.
Number 6, ensure effective board performance through monitoring governance process, board policies 1001 to 1011, and board superintendent relationship, board policies 1601 to 1605.
Number 7, establish the parameters for the board's committee negotiating employee contracts.
So I've gone through that. The motion still stands to find the board in full compliance of board policy 1003, points 1 through 7. Any final discussion or questions? Seeing none.
Actually, did we make a motion to find in full
Well, we
compliance?
did it.
We just made a motion to say that we would do it all at once.
Okay.
But now we should entertain, I move that we find the board in full compliance.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. So that the motion is to find the board in full compliance of board policy 1003, points 1 through 7, board job description. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstention? Okay, unanimous. The board is in full compliance. Moving on to 2C, Board Policy 1800 OE11, Facilities and Capital Projects. Oh, slow down. Facilities and capital assets.
Good evening. Tonight we're bringing OE11, and just out of curiosity, are you wanting me to go point by point and then find compliance by point, or find compliance by full document?
What is the feeling of the board?
Full.
Could we have a motion for that?
Do we need a motion?
I think it was
Yeah.
Consensus? Okay. All right, so go ahead.
Okay. Point number 1, establish a schedule and set priorities for capital construction, replacement, renovation, and maintenance projects. In setting those priorities, the superintendent will A, assign highest priority to the correction of unsafe conditions, B, schedule maintenance as necessary to enable facilities to reach or exceed their intended life, C, disclose assumptions on which the plan is developed, including growth patterns and the financial and human capital impact individual projects will have on other parts of the organization. 2, not recommend land acquisition without first determining growth patterns, comparative costs, construction and transportation factors, and any extraordinary contingency costs due to potential natural and man-made risks. 3, not authorize changes to construction schedules that significantly increase cost or reduce quality. 4, the superintendent shall advise the board of all change orders on a timely basis. 5, not allow facilities to be unclean, unsanitary, or unsafe. 6, not unreasonably deny the public's use of facilities as long as student functions and the academic programs are not compromised. 7, develop and consistently administer detailed facility use guidelines delineating A, permitted uses, B, the application fee structure, the applicable fee structure, C, clear user expectations including behavior, cleanup, security, insurance, and damage repair, and D, consequences, and enforcement procedures for public users who fail to follow the established rules. 8, provide and maintain a comprehensive and functional technology infrastructure. And that is all 8 points. And we request that the board find the superintendent in compliance with all points.
I move that we find the superintendent in compliance with OE 11.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to find the superintendent in full compliance of Board Policy 1800, Facilities and Capital Projects. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, we'll move to a vote. All in favor of finding the superintendent in full compliance indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Seeing none, it is unanimous. The superintendent is found in full compliance by the board. Okay. So we will now move on to Section 3, Partial Governance Process Monitoring. Section 8.
So Fred and I are going to tag team this one a little bit. These are all first readings, and they are related, so we are going to talk about them a little bit in how they are related. The first one listed, 3231, is an existing policy that we are recommending some changes based on the law. As we were researching this and updating it based on the policy legal guidelines that we receive quarterly, we noted that there were a couple of other policies that we do not currently have, but we have been following the law. But we felt it was important to bring these other two forward to the board as well, because they will specifically relate to each other based on what we need to be doing when it comes to student notifications in particular. So Fred has the first one up there, which is the changes. Fred, do you want to go into a bit of detail?
Sure. 3231, again, as Superintendent Koloski mentioned, is an existing policy. And so what you see are the changes in red that we're making based on legislative changes and clarifications from OSPI. And so the most significant change is in the paragraph regarding when a student comes into our school district, that we're not only, or exiting our school district, that we're not only sharing documents with that other school district with regard to discipline, immunization history, their cumulative record, in other words, but we also need to share any information we would have about juvenile court records or history of violence. And so this is, again, a reflection and really a change. So what would have been a pretty innocuous change leads into our other two policies that we should talk a little bit more in depth about, which again, as Superintendent Koloski mentioned, are things that we've done in practice, but we haven't necessarily had in policy. So I don't know if it's easier to talk about all three or to stop there, talk about the changes here, and then move on. We can do that however you would like to proceed.
So at this point, it's there's no action involved tonight. It's a discussion about the three documents. So however the board would feel is most appropriate to discuss all three simultaneously, or if you'd prefer to go individually through them.
I think it's fine to discuss all three simultaneously as recommended.
Great.
So, good with that? Director Jorgensen? Yes, great.
So looking at 3143, this one gets a little bit more in depth here, and if I could just speak to a couple elements of this particular policy as a new policy, I would really just, I think, want to articulate that there are a number of agencies that get involved, and as I'm sure Director Laurie could probably be a better expert about this than even I can be right up here. Actually, I know for certain that's the case. But because you have so many different agencies involved, what we like about this policy is it clearly identifies who's responsible for what. So you have a court responsibility there in that first paragraph. You have the Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, and what's their responsibility. And then hidden in these paragraphs is some responses to what the district would do. So for instance, in paragraph 2, it talks about what DSHS should do, and then it says, the district will ensure that this written information is provided to the pertinent building principal. So if we're receiving information as a school district from DSHS or the courts, then there's clear direction for what we need to do from central office to support our principals. And then it goes down, if you read into some of the other paragraphs, where there's a clear paragraph about what's the principal's responsibility to inform the staff there. I'd like to point out that in each of these components, we have had ongoing conversations with our Education Association and our partners in MIEA. In fact, part of the negotiations process led to some new language that was adopted 2 bargains ago, and that was Article 4, Section 7 in the CBA, where we outlined some of this about how we want to make sure that we inform all of our staff, teachers and paraeducators. And certainly it's in policy here, and it was also our practice that that's not broadcasting that broadly across an entire school, but rather to those individuals who are working most closely with that student. So again, I think the high-level takeaways for this 3143 is, with respect to students, how do we notify the district and others about juvenile offenders in our system so that we can provide the safest environment possible? The final policy then...
Can I
yes,
jump in?
Absolutely.
I have questions
Please.
about that. Is this model policy? Or
It is.
Okay. So, as one who advises kids...
Please.
I'm just really concerned with the notifications of every teacher of this student and to any other personnel who, and that it's a mandatory thing. And obviously, well, not obviously, I'm not talking about violent offenses or the much more serious offenses, but there's reporting requirements for assault in the 4th degree, which is a misdemeanor assault, which could be like, pushing someone. For high school, more often for high school student liquor offenses if they get a minor in possession of alcohol, and just the question of how much or how many people need to know that, especially if at the high school they have 7 teachers, and then how much. We're a small community. I trust our teachers to keep confidences, but how much of this needs to follow the student, and for how long, and how much, if anything, does the district have say over what is shared?
There's still discretion, and that's been our practice, is there's still great discretion. So for instance, if it is a minor in possession of alcohol, that's not something that is posing a threat or constituting a threat to anyone's safety within the school environment. And those types of things, Director Laurie, are not necessarily shared out widely. In fact, some of those types of things don't show up typically even in CUME files in terms of when they're coming. What this is really getting at is in terms of offenses that would be pose threats to the school environment as it's coming forward. But I've never seen one where it's been an MIP coming through or something like that. I don't know, Superintendent Kolosky, if you've experienced that in any other districts.
I have not, and I think it is really important to call out that confidentiality piece, which is spelled out in here as well. And it's incumbent on us as the administrative team to provide that training for our staff as well, and that reminder of they're given this information for the safety of students and themselves, but it is confidential information. So again, so often as we discuss, it does circle back to that professional development and training that we must be providing for our staff in every situation, and even one like this. As we're giving you this information, here's how you need to use this information to keep students and yourself safe, and the confidentiality of that information as well. When and where and how should you be talking about it?
Right. And does it stay in their student file forever?
Student records, in terms of it being in their cumulative record, it could potentially be there for as long as they're in the school district, unless there's court order to, expunge that
I was going
record.
to ask, do you get notification when things are expunged?
We should.
We hope to.
That's the.
Again, it's the other
That's our
agencies
hope,
involved.
but we're dependent upon them.
Of course.
When we do receive those, we certainly do pull those out, and we also have instances where we take action as a school district and say, for things like suspensions or whatnot, that we will enter an agreement with a student or family. It's a first-time thing that, if after X number of months you don't have any other violations, we pull that out of their record too. So we try to work with those. I think what this one really gets at is, especially if you're getting a student or if the courts are aware of a student who's in your school district that something's happened that they feel like we need to be aware of. To be honest, they don't notify us all that often at all anyway. Usually that comes from our school resource officers who's aware of something, but that just comes as a verbal, not necessarily a written document.
And I appreciate your comments about the discretion on who to share it with.
Yep.
Is there a way to add that into the policy?
We can certainly look for that.
Or even, making a statement after the fourth paragraph, that the principal, may take discretion.
About who needs to be aware within the school community.
Correct.
It does. Yeah, it could be.
Okay.
It could be in the procedure, and it does state in this policy. I just lost it. The judgment of the principal. So
Right.
that discretion.
What I'm worried about is the beginning of that sentence that says the principal or designee must provide the information received to every teacher, and then, or other, I guess it's open to interpretation, that's what lawyers do, to any other personnel who, and then in the judgment of the principal, supervises. So this district reads it as principal always has that discretion to make the determination. And if that's accurate, I would suggest that we make it clear that the principal has the discretion, because someone could read this and believe that it's mandatory.
I just want to remind, as it's a request coming for a change, to ensure that we have a consensus of a majority of the quorum to request that change in language, which is pretty simple, but we can do it with a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a...
Well, so this is legal requirement.
Right. So that question of, is it required?
And we'll go back and look at that there. Certainly the procedure will spell out a little bit more about how to enact it, but yeah.
And for the majority of the quorum, I'm in favor of supporting Deborah's request to look into that. Are there more who would support that?
Well, I'm going to try to speak vaguely here. I remember about a year or two ago, I had a school district that had a challenge with this, and I don't think that information was shared with the particular staff, and it created a big problem with students. It created a big problem with staff and the district. And so I think leaving it discretion, I understand that, but I also kind of understand the kind of the requirement because of things that could happen.
I don't know what incident you're talking about, but I assume it was a fairly serious one. And so that's, in my opinion, where judgment comes into play. Like I said, assault in the fourth degree, which has mandatory school notifications, is, I think, just, assault is harmful or offensive touching. And so, no, it could be a very minor offense. It could have had a big impact at the time, but as far as violence or danger in the future, I think more serious offenses speak for themselves. It also could be as part of the procedure that if the principal makes a decision, has to then justify it.
So I'm assuming that we'll see more changes in the second reading, and then we'll be able to comment and make a decision on that.
Certainly, and just a reminder, we've had more than one policy that we've taken more than
Right,
two.
you could have
I
3
think
or 4.
we had one recently that we got to 4 or 5 on it, and And that's all right, because we want you to be comfortable with what the language is really pertaining to. We want to absolutely stay within the law, so we'll do that research as well. But we can, we hear your concerns, and staff can take a look and bring some adjustments if they are allowable within the law, and or the suggestion of we're going to have it here in the procedures.
And it sounds like it's happening, and I would just want the policy to reflect the practice.
Yeah. What doesn't happen very often for us is especially when you get into that wording in the fourth paragraph where it says, right at the bottom, the principal maintains or receives from a juvenile court administrator or law enforcement agency. You know, we don't see a lot of that in our schools, given, you know, our students and, you know, the general decision-making that they do make is fairly positive. So we don't get into a lot of it. Obviously, this is covering for the entire state. But when it does come, it usually is of such an offense that, you know, we do need to, you know, alert folks, but it's not very often that we're seeing it. So sorry, I won't move on yet.
I'm just looking down to the two of you to see if you're for a modification to use discretion as opposed to a must.
Yes, I guess my interest would lie in, are we following the law? Are we going above and beyond the law? And then there's possible ways of going above and beyond the law, disclosing more than the law requires, which is one way, giving complete more discretion than the law requires. That's another thing. So I'm also concerned with the other one Deborah brought up, which is the liquor offenses. We very generically say liquor violations will be shared, and it's a very generic statement. So is that would be pretty much anything in there in that realm, from selling to DWI to, you know, being at a party somewhere. So that's concerning too, that it would follow someone that closely as well. It's a violation of privacy in some ways. We're also suggesting that all this information be given to other schools in case of a transfer. And so how broad is that information? So I think there's an exposure here in multiple cases: exposure for the district in giving too much or too little, exposure with the parents, litigation from them because we gave too much or too little, as well as jeopardized job prospects or college prospects. So this is fraught with issues that, you know, I'd like to know, one, what does the law require? And then two, where we're going beyond it. And that, I think, would make the board in a position to make a better decision.
If I can say one comment, the fourth paragraph that you're thinking about and talking about the principal receiving notification, that paragraph is basically verbatim of the RCW. So it is, that paragraph in the language is law, if that clarifies anything. And then the procedures would be more detailed.
I just want to say thank you to Director Lurie for bringing in her, Vice President Lurie, for bringing in her expertise, and then the district will take that into consideration and bring back a second reading, right?
We fully anticipated Director Lurie weighing in on this. We had that discussion, so we appreciate the input, and absolutely we knew coming in as a first reading that certainly we, as Ken indicated, we need to follow the law, right? That's first and primary. But how do we do that can be outlined in our procedures as well, as long as we're still following the law, to Director D'Souza's concerns.
Not to belabor, I just want to point out one more thing that's actually even more concerning. And in the second to last paragraph, if a student is convicted of, adjudicated for, entered into a diversion agreement for assault. And I'm not talking about the more serious offenses, because no one's ever going to get a diversion for the more serious offenses. It's just not a realistic paragraph. A diversion is an out-of-court, community-based program that keeps a juvenile from having to go through a court process. Really minor things can often go before a diversion board. I know that our diversion board on Mercer Island sees very few cases, so it's probably not a huge issue, but that's really concerning to me that a diversion for a misdemeanor assault would have a mandatory reporting. And I just want to, if the law says it, the law says it, and the law hasn't really caught up to what we know is best practice for kids, but protecting them and the community. But if that isn't mandatory, then it would be great to know.
And I think in that one, it's really with respect to if it's against a specific teacher, then they won't be placed with that teacher. Not that that's reported against as I read it in that section. That's only intended so if Director D'Souza is my teacher, even if I've gone through diversion, but I've done something such against him personally, I then can't be placed in his classroom again. That's all that I think, not that that's all, but I think that's the scope of that paragraph. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then there's one for against other students, and what does the student get protection? I think that's what that paragraph's trying to accomplish.
It's trying to maintain that safety of staff and students, and more specifically within the school setting, if the violation occurs in the school setting and then it becomes part of the record, how do we as a school make sure that others are protected?
I think other students and teachers have clearly a desire to be protected and informed as well. And I don't know if any of this is bargaining language as well and may have requirements around it or not. So I'd hope we'd adhere to that too.
So again, all three will come back to you with some further insight at our next meeting.
I did have, and let me find it. In the third policy, this would be 4314.
Yes.
In the third paragraph, no. Let me find it, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, I guess I was right. The third paragraph, individual directed threats of violence or harm are communications that create fear or physical harm to a specific individual or individuals, communicated directly or indirectly by any means. So my concern with that is that it feels very broad to me as to any perceived threat, indirectly by any means, and how that might be interpreted in a piece of policy.
Unfortunately, that's the law.
That is the law?
That's basically the definition of harassment. I mean, I don't know for schools, I can't answer specifically, but in terms of harassment, one could say something that isn't even intended for someone else to hear. The other person thinks it might be true and then goes and reports it, and that person who said something very likely in jest could be convicted of harassment. So I'm not saying not to look into something, but that seems to follow the definition of harassment. And it is very broad and can be quite.
Okay.
It's one of the things that we're rolling out the threat assessment across our school district, and actually we're in the midst of training each building on it right now. We've done a lot of training, but that's one of the items actually that you're hitting on that's hardest for our school teams too. And it really gets at that idea about, did someone make a threat or do they pose a threat? And then what does that mean and whose perception is that? Because someone may say they're posing a threat, someone else may say, no, that's making a threat. And then you're trying to sort out what are all the emotions tied to that and who's affected by that and who feels harassed by it or intimidated. I feel bullied or whatnot. And that's where it gets really challenging. And that's where the threat assessment process is trying to help detangle that a little bit and get a group of people to get on the balcony a little bit to look at it and say, okay, what is really going on here? And then what do we do for that student and the other students and staff who might be involved? So but we're running up against this as a system.
Thank you.
What are the notification requirements to the student who has their record updated by any of these things, student or parent? Are there any notification requirements?
Do you mean by the student who is the victim?
The recipient of these additions to my record file.
Gotcha. So a lot of these are all, if they're making those threats, then there's the applicable discipline that they are subject to. Those then become part of their record, is really that, and then any of the attachments with that. Is that, maybe I'm not answering.
Yeah, I guess if I was in a court case for possession of liquor or something like that, and some judgment was passed against me as a child, that gets notified to the district and put in my record.
Sometimes not. It's not always automatically sent to
But
the
if it
school
is
district.
sent, is there any notification back to me that has happened?
I would assume you're notified by the courts that we are getting notification, because they're now sharing information with a third party, which is the school district. So the court has the duty to notify students on that. Our practice is, if we're notified, we usually say, hey, we know what's going on here. How are we going to support you? That's where Youth and Family Services comes in as well. They oftentimes are aware of things even before us, just because of their affiliation with the city.
It's the court and their attorney's responsibility. It's any collateral consequence, whether it's immigration consequences, loss of firearm rights, loss of voting rights, or school notifications, loss of driver's license, things like that.
But student records are, of course, accessible by parents and thereby students as well. You have the parent has the right to request to look at what's in their student's file. So when something like this has occurred, hopefully, as Director Lurie said, they have been notified, but they do have the right to look at that within their student record as well.
Are there any other questions involving these comments?
Challenging policy. Thank you very much.
You bet. And I think Superintendent Kolosky and I talk about it often, but it's really a team effort trying to keep up with all of these policies as we fan through the policy and legal news. And Erin's a big contributor to that, but also Kendall. So I want to thank Kendall publicly for all of her work behind the scenes, helping us keep these straight and making sure, hounding us to make sure, have we looked at this? And she provides great guidance too. So thank you, Kendall.
And keeps us very organized in managing all of these policies as they come in. So.
Okay. So coming out of Section 3, there were a couple requests that, just to clarify certain language pieces, the board agreed to that request. The district said it wasn't a burden, so we'll look for that in the second reading
Yes.
at our next regular meeting.
And Superintendent Kolosky, maybe we can talk about this, and maybe when you're meeting with the president and vice president, but because we have back-to-back meetings coming up, with that, maybe April 4th would be a better one for this, since the March meeting's pretty packed with a fundamental report and some other things. So just a suggestion in terms of timing.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to Section 4, the consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda as published.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the consent agenda as published. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? No. Okay, so we will move on to Section 5, the Superintendent's Report.
Really nothing at this time other than looking forward to traveling to Olympia with our student representatives. We are on schedule to do that next Thursday. Yes, next Thursday. And hopefully they'll both be well and able to to travel with us. So looking forward to having that experience with our student reps.
Moving on to Section 6, Board Announcements, Inquiries, and Reports, the Legislative Representative Report.
Talked to legislative assistant to one of our 3 representatives for our district. Let's see. There's various student and school health safety bills going forward. The levy increased capacity did not get out of wherever it needed to get out of. I forget what the terminology is.
The simple majority? That one? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the levy.
Yeah. But this, there's a term for it. It can get out because it has to do with potentially urgent funding. So it has kind of a safety valve. Asked if there's anything the board could do right now. There really isn't. I think our 3 representatives are share similar values in supporting a lot of these bills. Really has to do with other representatives in other areas of the state that we're not their constituents. Sounded like special education. The multiplier right now is moving from 0.96 to 1.0, but there's maybe a possibility it might go to 1.07, which I think means that there'll be more funding, but that's still kind of in play. Yeah, I mean, I think we could go into it, but I think ultimately our representatives are saying there's nothing we can really do right now that would help the effort.
Yeah, it's a tough time at this point to advocate. There's some things you can do, but it's not the ideal time to be advocating and adding that conversation. So we are now beyond halfway through the legislative session for the year. And the House of Origin cutoff was on 3/13. So I was watching closely on 3/13 at 5 to see what made it out and what didn't. So we saw SHB 1216 concerning non-firearm measures, increasing school safety, did make it out of the House and is now in the Senate committee. And its companion, Senate Bill 5317, is still in rules, so in its House of Origin. And then SB 5315, increasing student support staff and prototypical school funding model, was buried in its House of Origin, so it didn't make it out, unfortunately. Senate Bill 5141, School Resource Officer Mandatory Training and Policies, passed the Senate unanimously, and it's now in the House Committee. On a recent phone call, I asked the direct question of who is going to fund that professional development. Would that be the responsibility of the city, agency, or the district? And the answer was it'll be the responsibility of the district. So this will be potentially an unfunded mandate. It's important to keep that in mind. Senate Bill 5091, state and federal special education funding, passed the Senate. It's now in the House, which is good. 5313, Senate bill, that's school levies, was left in the Senate committee. It's technically dead, but not really, was the response. And we can look to a title-only House bill, 2140, that is still, there's some possibilities around that. SEB, some interesting new information came out from SEB, and they're just discussing that now. If you go to the WASDA website, under legislative updates, there's some new example timetables of what that might look like. And the cost is now down from, it was estimated at 900 million, it's now down to 750 million, which is great at the state level. We're still on the hook at the local level for what we were before. But there's some new models as to what those premiums might look like, and some new funding rates. Delinking high school graduation requirements, that's House Bill 1089, House Bill 1599, concerning certificate of academic and individual achievement, passed the House, it's in the Senate committee, and promoting career and college readiness through modified high school graduation, passed the House, it is now in the Senate, so that's moving forward. That's been a big priority for a number of years. And that was the big update on the legislation. So.
There was one about the bond requiring simple majority that seems to have failed in the Senate too, right?
I think that was anticipated.
That was anticipated, I see.
But an interesting new step this year, which was advocated in large part through WASDA and WEA, was placing special gives offering to the legislature of additional boxes to check in exchange for a simple majority, and that seemed to move the concept a little further down the road for the first time. So the organizations are continuing to approach that in interesting and unique, creative, problem-solving ways. Yeah.
And then there was another one which was thinking about new revenue sources that has basically created a committee to go do this. So I wouldn't expect new revenue sources this year, which was contingent on a lot of Governor Inslee's more interesting school funding thoughts. So we were back to a more to the budget that didn't get a lot of attention, because it was there for no revenue sources and being anticipated. So unfortunately, school funding for mental health counselors and other things like that are not on the horizon.
Any other questions, comments on the legislative report? Seeing none, all right, we will move into Section B, which is the Mercer Island Youth Family Services Coalition Stakeholder Meeting Report. So there was a meeting this week. The board was in an exempt session at the same time as that meeting, so I don't have an update from that. I don't know if you received any feedback of how that went.
There were some emails, and I did speak to Jody. I think there's currently doing a doodle poll to meet sometime next week. Still crafting possibly two messages. One is the group is considering just a levy to be dedicated for the youth mental health counselors in our schools and senior counseling services, as well as another group's suggestion of enhancing that package as well. But that's kind of where it is right now.
Thank you. And those deadlines, they feel a little bit far away for any sort of filing date or whatever, but they're approaching quickly with the slow movement of government. So just watch that group and what's happening there. Okay, so any other questions or clarifications around that? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to Section C.
Actually, one question. Yes. Do we have any clarity around, we just had the YFS breakfast. Do we have any clarity around counselor funding in the near term? Has anything been sealed around that or not?
I believe the foundation I saw, they raised around $400,000 at the breakfast, which was interesting because it was split because of the snow days. So there were individuals who were going to be at the breakfast who couldn't be there, which then opened up seats for new people to give. So it kind of extended that over to events. It's good. As for short-term solutions, long-term solutions, I think there's a lot of things being kicked around. I'm observing the city council and kind of as they continue to deliberate what they're doing. I think there's still talks. The Schools Foundation has joined the coalition, at least in part, to explore. I don't think there's any solid answers.
I do know that the Schools Foundation Executive Director and the Youth and Family Services Foundation Executive Director have had some very strategic conversations. But at this time, my understanding is, because I've asked to please let us know if and when you are going to be able to make a public announcement, because this is critical for us. My understanding is they're not ready to make that public announcement as of yet, but as soon as I know, all of you will know as well. But I know that they've had some strategic conversations about short-term. Nothing that could be sustainable, of course, but what are some short-term funding solutions that the two entities, the two foundations, might be able to facilitate.
And I'd like to add, I think at the city's work study session, there was interest amongst, I think, a majority of the council members to go back and see what kind of money they could free up because it seemed like there was an interest there to making sure that they fill the gap too from the city. So there may be a presentation at the next city council meeting, perhaps.
And we're funded through this school year, right?
We are funded through June of 19, yes,
June.
through this school year. So the reduction, the initial reduction that's in the city budget, which would be one less among the elementary schools, would begin for the 1920, so in September, as it's written right now.
I also believe the school district has, we've got funding expectations from the Schools Foundation. So I assume you'd be involved in any decision of reprioritization around that, and then the board would be so informed as well if there are funding reprioritizations from outside our expectations.
Absolutely. That conversation, the conversation has been more centered around additional commitment to additional dollars to coordinate with the Youth and Family Services Foundation versus reduction in other dollars as they serve the needs of the district right now.
That sounds great. Thank you.
But again, it's all still in conversation.
Anything else? No. Okay, so let's move into section 6C, inquiries and reports. Would you like to go first, Director D'Souza?
Sure. Nothing to report other than, I guess, thank you to all the teams that were so successful. The radio team, the DECA, I think as well, there was one other, Destination Imagination too. So you can provide those. I just read them. Okay. Thank you.
I really enjoyed our site visit on March 5th to Island Park. That was a treat. And then later in that day, I got to go to the PAC meeting for Island Park. And I got to see Jennifer Wright, our former executive director and of learning services. Anyway, she was there in her new capacity and talked to us about software tool that our district's been using for a long time, Homeroom, and I used to use it. She showed our group about how staff can access data for students and some of the new bells and whistles of the updated software that's coming soon. So that was really nice. And other than that, nothing to report.
No report.
No report.
I head out tomorrow to Olympia for the Leadership WASDA. Our first session, the initial one was postponed because of the snowstorms. So Director Jorgensen is going to step into the high school PAC meeting for me tomorrow. Today with the Superintendent's Equity Advisory Council, we met and I got to see the thought exchange tool at work, which is being used, application where people are able to, instead of just ticking a box on a survey or actually putting in ideas and concepts of what they like and what's missing and adding. And then this tool kind of takes all the information of the focus group and throws it out, and people can star how they feel about those suggestions, and then it starts to show up in priorities, which I thought was really exciting. So I did sign into it. I didn't participate because I didn't want to throw it. But it was really great to see this room full of individuals breaking apart. You got to see the tool at use as well. And it's great to see them kind of pulling apart the work that we've spent the last year doing and other things that came in. I was like, well, yeah, I remember talking about that. And so I'm excited to see the result from all of the stakeholder groups as those come in and how that informs us. I'm really excited about the tool. Also, the Equity Advisory Council is also continuing their work on their draft purpose statement. And so just in that discussion, some really nice hot topics kind of rose to the top as that group is continuing the process of redefining who they are, what they represent, and their overarching missions and vision and values. So it's interesting to watch that group doing it as well. And some really great conversations that we could have definitely used another couple hours in that room. So I'm looking forward to the next meeting. And then I got a chance last night to attend the West Mercer Science Fair, a little bit modified this year. With changes in the science curriculum, fourth grade was no longer required to participate in the science fair itself. So there were fewer presentations from students, but the ones we saw were fantastic. There were more hands-on vendors there where students were able to go and experiment with different things, and then a big presentation at the end. It was, I thought, an interesting, a nice change. As West Mercer continues to kind of right-size in its community and the feel from 700 students to where it is now, I don't know, I just had this wonderful sense that this community has really come together, and watching how these events have changed. So it was great to be there with our young scientists volunteering for that. And I think that's all for my report. Yeah. So we've already covered Section 7, the candidate informational session. There's one thing left to Section 8, adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Motion is to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. Abstentions? No. It is 8:57, and we are adjourned. Thank you. And it's just one, right?